The Doom of MYMEARA. The following events take place on the planet Betalis III. Betalis III was discovered in the latter years of the Ornil Crusade, as the Crusade fleet returned victorious from the wars against renegade worlds in the St. Altus constellation. Whilst performing a long-range scan of the system, an explorator team from the Crusade vessel, the Divine Unification, discovered an ancient alien craft. Until Xenos survey teams could be dispatched to investigate, the Betalis system was deemed off-limits to all other Imperial vessels by inquisitorial sanction, and an area extending thousands of kilometers out from the system was seeded with mines. Confirmed to be of Eldar origin by the Order Xenos survey team sent to investigate, the craft was recovered from the planet for further analysis, whilst the Betalis system was meticulously scoured by hundreds of thousands of servitors. Decades passed as the servitors performed their scans, but no further Eldar presence could be found. Concluding that the craft had been abandoned and its crew had left by other means, the Order Xenos contingent departed, leaving the ice-blue Betalis star to once more drift alone in the depths of space. So it would have remained, had not others of the Imperium's great institutions cast their gaze upon it in their never-ending quest for resources. Although uninhabitable for the most part, the system was deemed to be rich in ore and other materials, rare elements from the stellar matter of its pale blue sun, heavy metals from the inner planets, and gas and ore from the outer worlds. The majority of the system was too toxic to support life, but the two outermost planets, Betalis III and Betalis VI, were classified fit for human habitation. Betalis VI was designated an industrial world, and over the span of a century, its surface was completely covered, both land and ocean, with thousands of forges, refineries, and manufactorums. Its location at the edge of the system saw it also become a staging area for troops being transported to and from the numerous war zones in the subsector and beyond. The colonization of Betalis III took less than 4 decades to complete. 57 million Imperial citizens were shipped en masse from an overcrowded hive world. Its name and location now lost in the continent-spanning halls of sector records that exist within the Imperium's vast bureaucratic divisions. As the colonists arrived, they looked on in wonder as their transports soared over hundreds of kilometers of unpopulated landscape, an environment the antithesis of the human-infested hive complexes they had left behind. But any who dared to venture out onto Betalis III's surface soon succumbed to its treacherous sub-zero conditions or were driven mad by agoraphobia. The wide-open vistas, anathema to the cramped confines hundreds of generations of their families had evolved in. The workers also soon discovered that the so-called brave new lives they had been promised came at a hefty price, one they would have to repay first through generations of servitude, toiling away in the many mines already being dug deep into the rock of the planet, or in the near-suffocating heat and fumes of recently built massive smelting plants. Some 12 generations later, their descendants are still restricted to the planet by administratum mandate until their forefathers' massive debt has been paid off. The only legitimate means of escape from this familial toll being to sign up to one of the Imperial Guard regiments that form the world's Departamento Munitorum human tithe. But this everyday suffering in the lives of the people of Betalis III would only get worse with the arrival of the war hosts of the Eldar. The Imperial forces defending Betalis III. Betalis III had its own planetary defense force as well as local militias. They were reinforced significantly by the 4 following contingents, dispatched from the wider Imperium to aid them in their struggle. The Cadian 6th Armoured Regiment. Following their defeat at the end of the Horus Heresy over 10 millennia ago, the human forces that had thrown in their lot with the gods of chaos retreated northwest into the region of the galaxy known as the Eye of Terror. Within this swirling maelstrom, where the boundaries between real space and warp space are at their weakest, There now exist some of the worst horrors known to mankind. Marauding bands of bloodthirsty renegades, the treacherous Chaos Space Marine legions, and demons so terrifying they are beyond the comprehension of all sane men. Scores of populated planets surrounding the Eye of Terror succumb to their predations each year, but there are those who have stood strong and weathered this foul tempest. One such world is Cadia, situated within the northern corridor of space called the Cadian Gate, one of the few known stable routes in and out of the Eye of Terror, or used to be. Cadia was, by sheer necessity, a fortress world. Over the centuries, the greatest military architects of the Imperium, including representatives from both the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Adeptus Astartes, have turned their strategically vital planets, cities, into heavily fortified bulwarks. This alone, though, does not guarantee the safety of those who live there, under the constant threat of attack from the forces loyal to the ruinous powers, and so its citizens were constantly trained for war. Reputed to be as bleak and merciless as their homeworld was, the men and women of Cadia were taught the skills essential to their survival from a young age. This brutal training regime created an abundant source of highly disciplined and battle-ready guardsmen for the Imperium, who regularly still see action in some of the harshest war zones throughout the galaxy. Cadia has generated many regiments of renown through its long history, and with a reputation well proven time and again in the heat of battle, the Cadian 6th Armoured Regiment has been instrumental in defeating the might of many enemy forces. Amongst its ranks can be counted some of the finest examples of tanks, super heavy vehicles and heavy artillery its homeworld could manufacture, but there should be nothing less than the best for a world that stood guard upon such a dangerous region of space. The Cadian 6th Guardsmen are trained on worlds close to the Cadian system. These have previously been reduced to nothing more than devastated wastelands by the forces of chaos. Won back after decades of bloodshed, Cadia's armies tirelessly train under live fire amongst their blasted cities and vast shell-cratered wastelands. There they will perform maneuvers and training exercise for days on end, until their commanders are satisfied that they have perfected the tactics and strategies necessary for survival on the true fields of battle. The results of this baptism of fire are such that by the time they have finished their initial training, Cadian tank crews are usually the equivalent of many veteran tank crews from regiments elsewhere in the Imperium. Notable campaigns: Shan's World, 483 M41. With a history dating back hundreds of years, the Cadian 6th Armoured Regiment has a distinguished military record. During the latter years of the Redemption Crusades, which were fought against the renegade worlds of the Telos 6 system, its tanks and heavy artillery flattened 5 of the enemy's 12 bastion cities on Shan's World, a major staging point for the enemy's forces. To achieve this, they first had to break through squadrons of Leman Russ, Basilisks and Chimera, which the renegades had captured from the planet's manufactorums and storage depots that now prowled the kilometers of wasteland surrounding the cities. Storming forward under heavy barrage, the Cadian 6th forced their way through, before encircling the enemy and hunting down those who had survived their first assault before they could recover. The tally of kills attributed to the Cadian 6th was a testimony to their battle skills, and they were credited with destroying over 30 enemy tanks for each one of theirs which was damaged. Praetor Sigma, 810 M41. The regiment was also cited for achieving the highest kill ratio during the War for Praetor Sigma, where it decimated thousands of creatures from an advancing Tyranid horde, now recognised as a scouting tendril of Hive Fleet Kraken. The devastation the guns of the Cadian 6th wrought provided assault squads from the Blood Angels chapter time to move in to destroy the Tyranid Hive Tyrant that had been orchestrating the Xenos attack on the now devastated world. With their connection to the hive mind severed, the remaining Tyranids on the planet simultaneously lashed out with such ferocity that over 3/4 of the Cadian 6th armour was overwhelmed within minutes. This bitter victory is remembered by those who now fight under the banners of the Cadian 6th each decade. A single volley discharged from each tank barrel and lasgun in the regiment, in salute of every company destroyed on that fateful day. Wah Ugblitz, 892 M41. Prior to the Batalis Free incursion, Those currently fighting under the banner of the Cadian 6th were deployed as part of the army group sent to defeat Nagrud Ugblitz, an Ork Goth warlord whose war had overrun a vast part of the Saras sector in the north of the Segmentum Pacificus. The Cadian 6th played a major role in the defeat of the Ork warlord, and during the final battle of the conflict, its tank crews formed the spear tip that broke through War Ugblitz's front lines on the devastated agri-world of Saras 7. By the end of the battle, the regiment had accounted for the destruction of close to 100,000 Ork tanks and artillery pieces, and had almost completely levelled the capital city that the Ork warlord had occupied. Batalis 3, 894 M41. The victory against the Orks was not an easy one for the Cadian 6th, and it was again reduced to less than half of its original strength. While new conscripts, tanks and other materials were en route from the Cadian system, the remnants of the Cadian 6th were redeployed to Batalis system. There, the Cadians were due to undergo hostile environment training on Batalis 3, prior to the regiment's redeployment to the wars being fought against tendrils of the, as then unnamed, Tyranid High Fleet on the ice worlds of Pentaris system, close to the edge of Imperium space. Even severely under strength, the Cadian 6th proved once again their great reputation in the unexpected attack on the ice world by the joint forces of the MYMEARA and Alatok Eldar Craftworlds. Without their armoured might, one more world would have undoubtedly been lost to the Emperor's light. Combining his depleted forces with those in system, the commander of the regiment, General Mindorus Odin, created an army with which to combat the Xenos threat. The men of the Cadian 6th proved once again their well-deserved reputation when they were faced with squadrons of skimmers and flyers from both the MYMERA Craftworld and their Corsair allies. Forming the bulk of Company Vengeance, the Cadian 6th Armoured fought a furious battle upon the Alatian plains. Led as ever by their commander, General Odin, the Cadian 6th soon found themselves outnumbered and outgunned as Eldar pilots set upon them in near constant waves of attack. Ever adaptable, the Cadians knew that the only way to survive and perhaps to stand a fair chance of defeating the Eldar was to break from the tactics they had recently used against the Orks and fight a more fluid battle. A game of cat and mouse soon ensued, with tank crews risking their lives by exposing their own vehicles as bait. Then they would, if they survived long enough, slip into what might have appeared to the Eldar to be a swirling, disorganized mass of Leman Russ and chimeras. It was nothing of the sort. Instead, the Cadians were performing, en masse, highly coordinated maneuvers, a much more refined version of what had been drilled into them during basic training years before. As the Eldar pilots unwittingly flew over the chaotic morass, the officers of the Imperium squadrons had already plotted which of their big guns would be in position to fire upon them. This tactic was by no means perfect, and many of the Cadian 6th crews did not survive. However, their efforts did prevent the swift, wholesale slaughter of Company Vengeance that its men had feared when they learned the scale of what they were facing. It also forced the Eldar to treat their enemy with a weary respect and change to a much more considered and precise attack pattern that slowed the rate of attrition, enabling the Cadians to hold out until reinforcements arrived. General Mindorus Odin, commander of the 6th Cadian Armoured Regiment, a product of the unceasing military machine of Cadia, Mindorus Odin demonstrated early on in his career an exemplary skill for tactical doctrine and command that far surpassed that of his fellow conscripts. By the age of 16, his squad leadership abilities had impressed his superiors to such an extent that he was given command of a White Shield platoon, holding the rank of junior lieutenant, an outstanding achievement even by Cadian standards. Odin's reputation as a promising young officer was sealed during a tour of the defences along the Cadian Gate, where his platoon saw action many times against marauding Chaos pirates and Ork warbands. As part of the Cadian 304th Regiment garrisoned there, he personally led the young guardsmen of his platoon into the heat of battle, each time spurring them on to meet their foe with equal ferocity, but tempering their youthful exuberance with level-headed, devastating effect. Following his successful tour of duty, and in recognition of his achievements, Junior Lieutenant Odin was reassigned to one of Cadia's renowned officer training corps, where he was eventually to specialize in the tactical doctrines and strategies of armored warfare. Unlike many other Imperial Guard regiments where officer training is academy-based, Cadia's officers are trained on the front lines. The notion of shutting its young military talent away in the stuffy halls of academia for years on end, seen as a total waste of time in a region where war is always on the horizon. For his actions whilst leading an armoured fist company in vicious street fighting against human rebels on Arnsworld, Odin was field promoted to colonel and posted to the headquarters staff of the Cadian 6th Armoured Regiment, eventually rising to the rank of general. Over the course of his long career, Odin has been wounded in action 5 times and ultimately received the Macarian Cross for his actions on Arnsworld. He has only ever been seriously wounded once, during the regiment's involvement in the war against the Orc hordes of Warlord Ugblitz on Saras 7. His injuries were inflicted as the general's command tank breached one of the final Orc barricades that surrounded the besieged city and was overwhelmed by the Orc warlord's personal bodyguard. Bloodthirsty beyond sense, even for a race as warlike as the Orcs, the 100-strong mob of Orc commandos launched themselves upon the general's battle tank. At such close range, its guns proved useless, and had it not been for the quick actions of the crew of a nearby Banewolf, then he might not have survived. Even then, the cloud of acidic poisonous gas it spewed into the ferocious Orc mob found its way into the general's Leman Russ through the damage the Orc mob had caused to it, inflicting horrific burns upon the revered tank commander and the other guardsmen within. When the Orc war was finally contained, the Cadian 6's heavy losses saw it withdrawn from the front line to rearm, train and await fresh recruits into their heavily depleted ranks. Whilst the new conscripts were en route from Cadia, the Cadian 6th was placed in strategic reserve and ordered to garrison the frigid world of Betalis Free, where it would also undergo an intense course of Arctic environment training. It was during this posting that the Eldar attacked. And lacking experienced, combat-ready forces, General Odin used his new powers as consul militant of the system to swiftly induct additional forces to fight alongside the Cadian 6th, building it up into an army capable of meeting the unprovoked Eldar invasion. As the war for Betalis Free progressed, the general personally led his battle group into the fray against near overwhelming odds. That he was able to command such a force with what must have been still near debilitating injuries is a testament both to the veteran commander and also to the blood stock of Cadia. The successful defence of the Ice World was destined to be the general's final victory. After the Betalis Free incursion, the Cadian 6th Armoured Regiment was sent once again to fight against the Tyranids, and this time on the fringes of the Segmentum Pacificus. General Odin was killed when his command vehicle was thrown into the air by a Morlock that had erupted from the ground below it, causing the vehicle to roll and the ammunition stored inside to detonate. The general's remains were later recovered and carried from the battlefield with full military honours. They have since been interred within a chapel upon the cardinal world of Armistern 7. In addition to Chimeras, Leman Russ and Bane Blades, the Cadian 6th also had access to the following armoured vehicles. The Malcador Infernus. The Malcador Infernus has now largely been replaced by the faster and more reliable Hellhound in frontline Imperial Guard regiments. A few aging machines survive, mothballed as sector war reserves, but it is now an armoured vehicle firmly relegated to second-line duties, and it is not uncommon to find aging Malcadors in the arsenals of garrison auxiliary units or planetary defence forces. In effect, the Malcador Infernus is simply a huge flamethrower on tracks. To supply its massive Inferno gun with fuel, it tows behind it a large fuel trailer. Within this Promethium is stored in multiple parts, pumped independently and mixed together in a chamber just behind the barrel to create a chemical jelly, which, after being compressed, jets out in a flaming mass that sticks to any surface. The massive gout of flames launched from the Malcador's Inferno gun is also effective at clearing minefields, the sudden heat detonating mine fuses on contact, as well as its main weapon. The vehicle also has two sponson mountings for additional heavy weapons. A highly flammable vat of chemicals is a dangerous cargo to bring upon any battlefield, and enemy fire has, on occasions, caused the entire load to detonate in a spectacular fireball that incinerates the Malcador and its crew. Postings to serve as Malcador Infernus crew are therefore never well received by guardsmen. Some unscrupulous commanders have refilled the Malcador's fuel tanks with corrosive toxins and acidic gases, turning it into a fearsome chemical gas dispenser, deployed when the complete eradication of the enemy is ordered. The infamous Death Corps of Krieg siege regiments have been responsible for such genocidal operations on many occasions. Its age means the tank often suffers from mechanical failures. A lack of spare parts sometimes make these fatal failures. Spare parts are always at a premium for units equipped with Malcadors, with only a few Forge Worlds now able to supply them. As with all Malcador variants, it suffers from an underpowered engine, which, whilst functional, means the tank struggles, especially on steeper gradients, and can quickly overheat. Although it lacks the usual smoke launchers, one additional feature of the Malcador is that it can quickly generate smoke by injecting fuel onto its hot engine, which then burns and creates a billowing, acrid cloud bank through the engine deck as an impromptu smokescreen. On Batalis 3, a company of Malcador Infernus were found in the inventory of its planetary defense force, with the big flamers being used primarily to quickly de-ice important roads, airfields and landing grounds. They were only kept in service as engineering vehicles, no longer considered fit for frontline service. When General Odin began to reorganize the 6th Cadian Armoured Regiment, he inducted the squadron into his order of battle and placed them in the Engineering Brigade. These troops were then divided amongst the regiment's 3 battle groups, with just 2 or 3 vehicles available to each commander. Those of Battle Group Empta were lost in its destruction at the Almatic facility. Those of Battle Group Odin formed part of his armoured reserve due to their lack of speed, and were finally committed to the war effort on the Alatian plains when the general ordered Company Vengeance's last counterattack. None survived the fighting. The vehicles of Battle Group Vlar did not see action during the war. Praetor Armoured Assault Launcher. Based upon a hull variant design of the Crassus Armoured Assault Transport, the Praetor is named for the sophisticated multiple heavy launcher system it mounts in place of the Crassus's generous transport capacity. The Praetor launcher is a sophisticated weapon that far predates the introduction of the Crassus itself, and that is thought to have last seen widespread service on the land leviathans of the Talarite rebellion forces, which gouged their own pocket empire during the dark years of the Nova Terra Interregnum. The STC template for the weapon, along with several others of note, was thought lost until relatively recently, when the tech priests of the reconsecrated Forge World of Zao Arcade unearthed the data in the depths of that once nightmare-haunted realm. This has ultimately led, with the dissemination of the powerful Crassus chassis, to the introduction of a new mobile Praetor weapons platform by Zao Arcade's manufacturer, which has spread relatively swiftly through the frontline regiments throughout the Segmentum Tempestus and beyond. While their Praetor's relative sophistication and material cost means it will unlikely supplant more common Imperial designs, its durability and versatility have already found it a treasured place in the arsenal of the units facing the harshest enemy powers ranged against them. Due to its low number in the region, the Praetor saw limited action during the incursion of Batalis 3 by the forces of the MYMEARA and Alatok Craftworlds. Its crews distinguished themselves, however, during the Battle of Alnitak, their Praetor launchers being equipped with missiles carrying both Foehammer and Firestorm warheads. These accounted for the majority of confirmed kills amongst the Corsairs who attacked Battle Group Eptida at the Bregan Glacier, receiving little damage in return, until all were destroyed in the detonation of the facility. Praetors assigned to Company Vengeance were mainly crewed by veteran Cadian 6th Armoured Regiment Guardsmen during the battles fought on the Alatian plains. These were used in a long-range defence capacity, providing cover from incoming Corsair vessels. Crassus Armoured Assault Transport. This immense armoured carrier is named after one of Lord Solar Macarius's greatest generals, Borgen Crassus, who remained steadfastly loyal to the Imperium throughout the grim and bloody Macarian heresy that followed the Lord Solar's death. Its provenance may be considerably older and stranger than commonly guessed, however, and some factions within the Divisio Militaris believe it is a reclaimed design, originating within the reconquered Forge world of Zeo Akkad, and for that reason, suspect. Regardless of this, the Crassus has become widespread in use by the Imperial Guard and Adeptus Mechanicus armoured units of the Southern and Western Segmentum Tempestus, and with production of the design being taken up in the last several centuries by the major Forge world of Lucius, it is now being used extensively to resupply units close to the Eye of Terror, to replace ongoing losses in that steadily worsening war zone. There, as elsewhere, it has achieved considerable fame for its durability and power, leading it to develop an almost talismanic reputation for some siege assault units, to the disquiet of some within the Commissariat and Departamento Munitorum. Its weapons are used in a primarily defensive capacity for troop deployment, but it can also be retrofitted with a hunter-killer missile. This one-shot option is most often used against enemy tanks. It is very effective, although best deployed en masse, with that of other Crassus to maximise its effect. On Batalis III, the Crassus armoured assault transport was crucial in deploying guardsmen to the various war zones across the planet's frozen wastes, capable of holding up to 35 guardsmen or 2 Cyclops demolition vehicles. It played a crucial role in the Battle of Alnitak, enabling Colonel Emptida to reach the facility before the Eldar, and also ultimately enabling him to destroy the facility there to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. The Elysian Drop Troops. The Elysian Drop Troop regiments originate from a system located approximately 30 light-years from the hive world of Armageddon in the northwest of the Segmentum Solar. Their planetary system and the surrounding region of space are relatively new in galactic terms, and within them lie vast regions of swirling debris and asteroid fields still left over from their formation. These make for excellent ambush sites for the marauding Orc warbands and pirates that plague that part of the sector, particularly as the system is on a major Imperial trade route. Regiments drawn from Elysia are therefore well trained for ship-to-ship boarding actions and also deployment via low-flying dropships, enabling them to land far behind enemy lines without being detected. Some of the most renowned operations performed by the Elysian Drop Troop forces include the Scopios incident in 873 M38, when 2 companies from the 22nd Elysian Drop Troop Regiment saw action against enemy forces of unknown Xenos construction, and the 1st Drop Troop Regiment deployment to the Eye of Terror. During the Batalis III incursion, an Elysian Drop Troop strike force was redeployed to the planet whilst en route to the Uranth system. The Elysians had been part of the Legio Griffanicus convoy that had diverted to Batalis III after General Odin petitioned the War Griffins homeworld for aid. Unable to proceed to the Uranth system without the convoy's support, the Elysians had no option but to become part of the defence force for the Ice World. This, though, did not come without certain conditions from the Elysian command, who voiced strong concern about General Odin's ability as an armoured company commander to use such a specialised infantry resource. The strike force was only to be deployed when absolutely essential to the success of the war, otherwise it was to be held in reserve. The strike force, under Captain Isata, was duly held in reserve at Port Raya for most of the war, only performing occasional scouting patrols in its nearby vicinity. It was finally scrambled on the orders of Inquisitor Lord Dansk, when the breakaway force from the MYMEARA Craftworld circumvented Company Vengeance and headed for Aresta 6 mining facility. The rapid deployment of the Elysians aboard their Valkyries enabled them to get into position on the surrounding hillsides before the Eldar could land their troops there, thus denying the MYMERAN Guardian squads the advantage of attacking from higher ground during their assault. Although they differ in their method of deployment from the more common rank-and-file Imperial Guard squads, more likely to drop deep into enemy territory using grav chutes from high altitude or via attack craft than marching straight up to the front line, some organisational aspects of the Elysian Drop Troop squads remain firmly based upon the tenets of the Tactica Imperialis. Their regiments still utilise the standard squad composition of a sergeant leading 9 guardsmen, interspersed with additional specialists trained in the use of assault weapons, vox equipment and demolitions. All drop troopers will also be armed with lasguns, Actran pattern, Mark 6, supplied with 5 power cells. Frequently, the deployment of Elysian drop troops is preceded by a prolonged orbital or ground-based artillery bombardment, hitting deep behind enemy lines. Although this can reduce the threat the Elysians will face upon landing, they still have to overcome the effects of the bombardment by their own forces. The region they land in will almost certainly now be treacherously cratered and covered with a thick bank of choking smoke or toxic chemical smog. Elysian guardsmen are therefore meticulous, sometimes to the point of obsession, in regards to the condition of their pressure suits, as the slightest tear or snag will be exacerbated tenfold as the air whips past their bodies during the descent. Elysian drop troops are generally issued with Type 5 pressure helmets, which incorporate both pressure equalizing air protectors to prevent the guardsmen's eardrums rupturing during high-altitude grab drops, and also data display screens within their visors. These vid screens are particularly essential for relaying data during a descent, keeping the sergeant apprised of the location of his men as they land, and providing up-to-date intelligence regarding enemy troop disposition within the vicinity, and also any alterations to their original orders. If feasible, the squad may be dropped into action via Valkyrie assault carriers with their heavy equipment underslung below the Valkyrie Sky Talons. Each Sky Talon is capable of carrying 1 Taurus or 2 drop Sentinels, which can be dropped from very low altitude, whilst the heavily armed Sky Talon clears the drop zone with its nose-mounted heavy bolter and Hellstrike missiles. The Sky Talon can also drop large equipment pods, which contain the squad's heavier weapons or long-range ground scanners to provide targeting data, should the craft be called upon to provide support to ground troops. Able to move fast and traverse many different types of terrain, the Elysian drop troopers use the Taurus Rapid Assault Vehicle and Drop Sentinel, in preference to the heavy tanks commonly favoured by other regiments. Both can readily fulfill a scouting role and also mount flamers, grenade launchers and heavy las weapons to act in a support capacity for infantry. The Elysian drop troopers have to carry most, if not all, of their equipment into battle with them. All of it, by necessity, therefore, has to be lightweight and extremely portable, as the guardsmen may not be resupplied for many days or weeks, depending on how far their mission is behind enemy lines. Weapons are likely to be specially designed for the squads or highly modified by the guardsmen themselves, with superfluous components being removed to reduce the gun's weight. Ammunition is split between the squad members to maximise capacity, particularly grenades and power packs for some of the more specialised weapons. Elysian drop troopers will be issued with bullpup lasguns and close combat weapons, with sergeants also receiving las pistols. Both will have been heavily modified from the standard pattern for their type and can be used with the same power pack, enabling the drop troopers to maximise the resources provided by their fallen comrades. Legio Griffanicus, the War Griffins. Born of a time when the first temples to the Omnis Sire were raised upon Mars, the Titan legions of the Adeptus Mechanicus are the personification of the military might of the Imperium. Bristling with macro cannons and missile launchers, capable of wreaking terrible destruction upon an enemy, they dominate battlefields and are a testimony to the consummate skill of the tech priests of the Cult Mechanicus. They range in size from the Warhound Titans used predominantly in a scouting role, up to the colossal city-high Emperor-class Imperator Titan. All are constructed upon a skeleton of adamantium and armor plates, and protected by massive void generator shields, and there is little that can truly damage them save for one of their own kind. Each Titan's weapons and other vital systems are controlled by a crew zealously dedicated to their war liege, the highest ranked amongst them being the Titan's princeps. Once a man like any other, through the addition of cerebral augmentation he is both physically and mentally connected with the Titan via its mind impulse unit. Once joined, he feels all that it feels, sees all that it sees, and with a mere thought can unleash its devastating armament against those who would dare oppose it. Like so many who were caught up in the civil war now known as the Horus Heresy, which nearly destroyed the Imperium of mankind over 10 millennia ago, the Titan legions were split into those who remained loyal to the Emperor and those who sided with Horus. Amongst those that remained loyal was the Great Titan Legion of the Legio Gryphonicus. This noble house, whose motto is War of the Just, has seen action in many battles against traitor legions since then, and been instrumental in halting the Black Crusades of the Chaos Warlord Abaddon the Despoiler, that threaten, all too often, to pour forth from the Eye of Terror. Known also as the War Griffins, the homeworld of the Legio Gryphonicus had not yet suffered the devastation wrought upon it by the Tyranids of High Fleet Leviathan by the time of the Batalis Free incursion, and it was able to provide 8 battle titans in total to the war effort. Most ancient amongst these was the Invictus Nova, a Reaver battle titan that had been constructed just after the Legion's creation millennia before. Over its centuries-long existence, the Nova has seen action against many of the Xenos races infesting the galaxy. But it was its previous experience fighting against Eldar Revenant Titans that was crucial to the Imperial Titan's successful defense during the battle for Batalis Free. The vital intelligence stored within the Nova's systems enabled its princeps to quickly locate vulnerable points within the similarly designed Eldar Phantom Titans hollow fields. And although none of the Eldar Phantoms were destroyed outright, the Titans of the Legio Gryphonicus inflicted enough damage upon both to cause them to retreat. Had this not been the case, then the war for Batalis Free may have had a very different outcome. Bran Redmoor's Great Company. Amongst the Space Wolves, or the Vilca Fenrica, there is one group that seems to live under a shadow. That of Bran Redmoor's Great Company. It is renowned for its savagery in battle, and the Inquisition has, within its records pertaining to loyal Adeptus Astartes deviation, accounts of terrifying feral creatures shadowing the deployment of the Great Company. Those, though, have yet to be proved, and the Space Wolves chapter ignores all demands to account for these allegations. The Great Company's Wolflord, Bran Redmoor, also does little to dispel these rumours, and that he has so recently begun to take to the battlefield alone, rather than leading his battle brothers, only serves to court the growing attention the Inquisition and the Ecclesiarchy are paying upon the Great Company. No one has yet dared to question their loyalty to the Imperium, and its proven record combating mankind's enemies has forced the Inquisition to so far stay its hand. Selected battle honours. The Massacre of Krasnodar, 801 to 849 M41. Between its deployment at Mantus and the Batalis Free incursion, there is little mention of Bran Redmoor's Great Company in Imperial records. Buried deep within the Inquisition's archives for the Western Segmentum Pacificus sector, there is one file which has been classified as accessible only by the highest echelons of that order. It has only ever been accessed by one person, and his location is currently listed as missing. The file is heavily restricted, because it is a full account of the 50-year war fought against the Khornate Chaos Demon Krasnodar, which manifested within one of the few heavily populated Imperial systems on the border between the Halo stars and the west of the Segmentum Pacificus. As it emerged into real space on the 4th planet, the demon's thunderous war cry was heard by all on the world. Driven beyond sense by its insidious war chant, the entire population rose up and began to wage war on neighbouring populated planets. In response, a massive Imperial Guard army was raised to defeat the demon and its followers. No record exists of any of the billions of guardsmen who were raised returning from the region during or after the war, and all files pertaining to the system have since been expunged from the Departamento Munitorum facilities. The demon was cast successfully back into the warp by the combined forces of the Inquisition and the Grey Knights chapter. It is at this point that Bran Redmoor's Great Company is believed to have played its part in the war. Although it is not mentioned by name, the account of the battle against the chaos-turned-human hordes whilst the Grey Knights fought the demon bears what appears to be the mark of the Wolflord. An attempt to forcibly remove this mark has clearly been made at some point, as it is now barely recognisable. That the description of the battle is near identical to one described in a 300-verse saga written by the Great Company's rune priests in the years immediately following the war, has not yet come to the attention of the Inquisition. The relief of Mantus, 766 M41. Deep in the Gothic sector, the binary worlds of Allegia and Mantus orbited each other peacefully for thousands of years, loyally manufacturing lasguns for use in the Imperium's many wars in the sector. That peace was shattered, though, when the world's system was invaded by the massive Ork war, led by Ugnub's Man-Stomper from the Ork Bloodaxe's clan. Both planets maintained a strong planetary defense force, and were also well into the process of training regiments as part of their Departmentum Unitorum tithe. Regardless, Mantus's planetary governor still sent out a request for reinforcements as soon as the war's hulks appeared in the system. 3 weeks later, his aid blasted its way into the system in the form of Bran Redmore's Great Company. The less protected world of Allegia had already been overwhelmed by the Orks, but pockets of resistance still fought on Mantus. Tearing through its atmosphere in scores of drop pods, the Great Company landed close to where fighting was fiercest, north of the planet's main spaceport, close to where over 15,000 Imperial Guardsmen were mounting a last-ditch defense. As the Guardsmen prepared for yet another charge by the Ork horde upon their battered lines, a great roar rose up from the west. Having worked their way around the horde's flank from their drop zone, the Space Wolves of Bran Redmore's Great Company began to cut a bloody swathe through the horde, with little more than chainswords and bolters, and according to unsubstantiated eyewitness accounts, also their teeth and bare hands. The unexpected assault rippled through the Ork masses, causing tremendous confusion as the Greenskins were torn between attacking their original enemy and turning to face this new foe. Whilst they hesitated, the squads from Bran Redmore's Great Company tore their way through the horde. It took 14 hours for the Space Wolves to fight their way to the besieged guardsmen that day, the number of Ork dead numbering in the tens of thousands by the time Bran Redmore pulled his bloody chainsword out of the body of the last Ork he had killed. With its warlord slain by the Wolf Lord, the impetus of the Ork war waned. Imperial Guard reinforcements were then shipped into the region in a massive cleanup operation to prevent Ork survivors of the war establishing themselves within the system. The Imperium had learned a bitter lesson many times over that once a war had been defeated, those who live may be fighting the remnants of it for many years after. Wolflord Bran Redmore, Cursed Lord, Wolven Kin, the Blooded Hunter. Bran Redmore is a Wolflord, the chieftain of a great company of up to 200 Space Wolf warriors, one of the 12 Wolflords that lead the Space Wolves chapter under the Great Wolf Logan Grimnar. The character of each great company's commander, to a greater or lesser extent, influences its warriors, and Bran Redmore's company is renowned for being a savage pack of cunning and ruthless killers. This is because, more than any other of the great companies, the stain of the Space Wolves' greatest secret lies heavily upon them, that of the curse of the Wolven. For this reason, Bran's Great Company is looked upon with some suspicion by the other 11 Wolflords. They all respect the company's fighting prowess, but those that serve under the banner of the Blooded Hunter are regarded as tainted and draw the eyes of those of the Imperium outside the Space Wolf chapter more than they wish. More Space Wolves bearing the curse of the Wolven serve alongside Bran Redmore than any other Wolflord. Amongst the upper echelons of the Space Wolves, there is an unspoken truth as to the reason why, for Bran has risen to become a lord, despite being afflicted himself. After the death of Lord Andrimhinna during the Mordrak campaign, Bran Redmore was promoted by Lord Andrihimna's retinue to replace him as leader of his great company, as is the Space Wolf chapter's tradition regarding the rights of succession. It was not a popular decision. In private, other Space Wolf commanders stepped forth to voice their concerns, especially the venerable wolf priest, Ulrich the Slayer. Was Bran to be trusted in such a position of power? Would he allow his darker, feral nature to take control of his mind and soul? The great wolf, Logan Grimnar, quashed all complaints, for he could see that Bran was an extraordinary warrior, and through sheer force of will had subdued the beast within. In this matter, Logan Grimnar had looked to the advice of his eldest counsellor, Bjorn the Fell-Handed. Only the ancient dreadnought was old enough to recall that Bran would not be the first to reach such high office with the curse upon him. Although he fully supports Bran's promotion to Wolflord, Logan Grimnar is not without caution and has ordered Ulrich the Slayer and his wolf priests to keep a close watch over Bran and his company, so that they do not stray too far and risk becoming another lost Great Company. The current Great Wolf will not risk repeating the mistakes of the past. Even on the battlefield, or perhaps especially upon the battlefield, Bran, knowing the beast that lurks within him, avoids the close company of his warriors. Having issued his orders before deployment, he now prefers to hunt alone, or in the company of a pack of Fenrisian wolves, and leaves his trusted Wolfguard battle leaders in direct tactical control. Should the curse of the Wolven take him, then Bran is transformed into a huge, ravenous wolf beast, fully 12 feet tall, powerful, fast, and with claws that can rend plasteel and fangs like adamantium daggers. Consumed by a frenzied bloodlust, the Redmaw tears its foes apart in an orgy of blood. But despite its bestial appearance, the Redmaw is no mindless killer. The beast still retains a hunter's cunning, using stealth and patience to get close to its prey before pouncing upon them in a sudden explosion of gory violence. These are also the tactics of the hunt that Bran instills into his warriors: to be patient and await the chance to strike. For his great company, there are no headlong rushes to battle or proud boasting of their strength and battle prowess. Instead, they plan carefully, maneuver and make tactical strikes to weaken the foe before the sudden final assault, often from many directions, but always with overwhelming and pitiless savagery, tearing an enemy force to shreds. In battle, Bran is equipped as befits a mighty Wolflord. He wears rune armour, decorated with wolf totems, and an ornate belt of Russ. For a weapon, he bears the Frost's Blade Langvast, a master-forged relic of the chapter, gifted to him by Logan Grimnar upon his promotion to the rank of Wolflord. The forces of the Eldar war host. Craftworld, MYMEARA. The lost behind the veil. The cursed. Those upon whom the Eldar have waged war and survived will have witnessed but a small measure of the intense racial psyche that led them to leave their original homeworld many hundreds, if not thousands of millennia ago, to conquer the stars. They are a people who have been compelled throughout their evolution by the desire to experience the absolute in all they do, whether it is creating weapons so technologically advanced that they tear apart the bounds of reality, or in the reshaping of airless planets into richly opulent paradise worlds. This drive to achieve all that they can is both a blessing and a curse, for it once almost destroyed their race completely. Before their race was torn apart, a small few among the Eldar had the foresight, or, more importantly, the desire, to question where their ambitions would eventually lead them. But ultimately, all experiences have a limit, and those Eldar who acknowledge this could see that, for their people, their ways could only end in disaster. Amongst the wise few, the Eldar of MYMERA, as their system was located on the extreme limits of the Eldar Empire, the corrupting influence of the many pleasure cults that had so far infiltrated other Eldar societies had barely reached them, and so they looked upon the ever-increasing extremes their brethren elsewhere in the Eldar Empire were going to with disgust and revulsion. None, though, could deny their growing curiosity to experience this life of moral abandonment. And the wisest of the MYMERA Eldar realized that if they did not distance their population, it too would eventually be consumed by the madness. Through sheer force of will, the MYMERANs tempered their efforts towards building a massive starship, one in which their entire system's population could flee in, should they so choose. It took many decades to complete, and with each that passed, the system's worlds became ever more tightly gripped by the taint that had already poisoned most of their race. Only half of their population were on board when the vessel finally set sail, forced to flee as the acts of depravity on the worlds below them escalated into whole-scale bloodshed and slaughter. The MYMERA Craftworld travelled for many months until it was nearly out of range of Eldar space. This, though, was still not far enough for it to escape the event now known as the Fall, and nearly a third of its population was destroyed in the psychic scream that heralded the birth of the Chaos God Slanesh. Lost in their grief for the death of their race, the Craftworld continued to drift through the stars, believing themselves now alone in the galaxy. Their mourning, though, was to be brutally cut short, as they fell prey to those who dwelt in the darkness beyond the once great Eldar Empire. And hundreds of thousands of MYMERANs died as they fought to protect themselves from attacks by Orks and things far worse. During these terrible times, hope came to the MYMERANs in the form of Irilith, a disciple of Asuruman, who strode forth one day from one of the many portals on the Craftworld that had remained inactive since their departure. Through his wisdom, the warrior citizens of MYMERA learned how to combine the aspects of stealth, speed, and overwhelming firepower to utterly decimate their foe. Together, the warriors of the Craftworld and the Phoenix Lord set about clearing a safe path through the galaxy for their world vessel, hitting out mercilessly at any who dared to threaten them. Irilith's presence upon the Craftworld was short-lived, though. Calling a meeting of the Council of Seers, he announced that the ultimate reason for his arrival upon the Craftworld was to prevent its utter destruction, which he had seen in a vision whilst undergoing his training with Asuruman, first of the Phoenix Lords. Centuries in the future, the Craftworld would sail through the empire of a hostile race, so vast and powerful that they could neither avoid nor survive its wrath. The Phoenix Lord could prevent the doom of the Craftworld now if the Council would grant him a war host large enough to destroy the Empire, which at that point in time was still in its infancy. Bowing to the wisdom and foresight of the Phoenix Lord, half of the entire Craftworld's war host was given over to Irilith. As the last citizen warrior stepped across the threshold of the portal the Phoenix Lord had appeared from years before, the device was destroyed as per his instructions, for fear that the enemy would one day somehow discover how to use it to invade the Craftworld. If his war host was victorious, then the Phoenix Lord would find some other way to ensure their return. That was the last those who remained on the Craftworld saw of their brethren. As their vessel slowly drifted through the systems where Irilith had said the empire of their eventual destroyers would be, they could see that he had been true to his word, and the paths of the alien race's evolution had been altered. Planets along their route had once been the site of cataclysmic battles. Whole cities had been destroyed by what could only have been Eldar weaponry, and the reptile-like aliens scavenging amongst the ruins were now little more than savages. Still, though, there was no sign of Irilith or the MYMERANs. The Craftworld continued their search, and eventually encroached upon part of the dominion of mankind. Realizing that to continue through such a populated region of space would put them at a terrible risk, the seers of the MYMERA Craftworld chose instead to conceal their great star vessel and continue their search through other means. They came to rest in a region of space that had not yet been infested by other races, and using their technology hid themselves away, drawing the stellar matter of a nearby star around their Craftworld like a shroud. There they remained for centuries, sending out rangers in the hope of locating their lost kin. During their search, the rangers came into contact with other survivors of their race, although the MYMERANs would have preferred to remain concealed from all, even their own kind. They recognized that they would need the support and protection kinship provided, and brokered an alliance of sorts with the Alatok Craftworld and its Corsair allies. The price of their allegiance being the exchange of Eldar technology not seen by Alatok since the fall. When the Phoenix Lord was finally located, it was not the MYMERANs who found Irilith. Instead, while searching for new resources to rip from their world, Betalis free, human colonists broke through into a massive cave system, the site, thousands of years before, of the final battle against those destined to destroy the MYMERAN Craftworld. During the conflict, MYMERA's enemies had been defeated, but as the Phoenix Lord Irilith saw in his vision, it was at the cost of his and the war host's lives. When a Phoenix Lord is slain, though, he does not truly die. Only the body of the warrior hosting his spirit is killed. The Phoenix Lord's essence remains within his war panoply, to be taken on by the next Eldar warrior to don it. When the colonists broke into the cave, they triggered an ancient defense system within the Phoenix Lord's armor, intended to protect it whilst his spirit is in a dormant state. This caused the cave-in, which killed all the miners and also alerted those who still tended to the Phoenix Lord's shrine on the MYMEARA Craftworld to his location. In the days and weeks following the incursion of Batalis III, the Space Wolves of Bran Redmore's great company and an Imperial Navy fleet fought a war against the Corsairs near the Karana Nebula, determined to rid them from the system once and for all. Before the Corsairs finally retreated, an energy signature of monumental proportions was registered moving deep within the center of the dust cloud. Before it could be investigated, a great storm began to rage within the nebula, before swiftly calming. As yet, no Imperium vessel has been able to penetrate the outer boundaries of the dust cloud to investigate this, but it has been noted that they will be able to soon. The solar winds of Batalis' star now no longer flow towards the nebula, and it will eventually dissipate into the voids of space beyond. Craftworld Eldar. Having lost so many of their brethren to the terrible events of the fall, the Eldar of Craftworld Eldar embraced the strict discipline of the Path of the Eldar to a near zealous extent. They also vehemently avoid contact with others of their kind lest their influence drags them down to the same depths of depravity the Eldar Empire fell to, devoting themselves instead to a life of harsh discipline. This does not sit well with all, and there are some, particularly among the younger generations, who cannot embrace what this entails, even though it may mean they are banished from their home and kin. Those who were forced to leave Craftworld Eldar or go of their own volition may eventually seek to join the Corsair bands. Others remain true to their people and patrol the Eldar webway to ensure Alator's continued survival, seeking out any threats to the Craftworld, but now free to explore the worlds beyond it. It was a ranger squad from the Alator Craftworld who located the lost MYMERA Craftworld, finding an entrance to a portal in the webway, inscribed with symbols none of the Eldar Rangers recognized. They sent one of their number to seek advice from the Alator Council of Seers. The response came in the form of Alator's greatest Farseer at that time. Realizing that the Rangers had found a portal to one of the lost Craftworlds, the Farseer called upon ancient knowledge he had learned many centuries before when he had first taken the Path of the Seer, to break the seal which protected the portal. Just beyond it stood the Farseer of the MYMERA Craftworld and his bodyguard of shadow spectres. At first, the MYMERA Farseer wanted his people to have no dealings with the Alator, for fear they were no different from those they had fled from, and it seemed as if, once more, there would be battle between elder kin. However, Alator was in many respects similar to the MYMERANs, and its Farseer was able to persuade his refound kin that this could be the basis on which they could strike up an alliance to each Craftworld's benefit. Alator's homeworlds had been located on the frontier of its race's empire, and like the wiser Eldar upon MYMERA, some of its people had also realized the depths their kin would soon fall. Casting out into the stars almost too late, they barely survived the atrocity, and since then, Alator had also had to fight to survive. Amongst these dark days was an encounter with a splinter fleet of the bioships from Behemoth, the Tyranid High Fleet, which would later go on to devastate the Ultramarines chapter world of Macragge in 745 M41. The swarm of Tyranid bioships had been discovered lying in the path of Alator Craftworld by the fleet of cruisers and escort ships which scouted ahead of it. The spread of Tyranid ships was so vast as it closed upon the Ford Eldar Armada, but it had not counted upon the skill of its opponents. Perhaps never having encountered such a race as the Eldar in its own galaxy, the Tyranid fleet was unprepared for the swiftness of the Eldar vessels and the accuracy of their laser batteries and torpedoes. As the bioships vomited forth their lethal payloads of drones, squadrons of Alator's Hellebores and Nightshades swept in to destroy them. In return, their pilots found their vessels attacked by huge feeder tendrils, which punched through their hulls, unleashing Tyranid warriors into their midst. The furious battle raged on the ships and amongst the stars for many days, each moment seeing Alator's Craftworld move ever closer to within range of the bioweapons of the largest Tyranid ships. Knowing that an invasion of their Craftworld would likely spell the end of their people, the Alator fleet set itself to destroy as many of the largest Tyranid vessels that they could. With the massive form of the Craftworld literally hours away on their long-range screens, the Eldar fleet succeeded. By attacking the largest ships, they also destroyed or seriously injured the largest of the Tyranid creatures within. With its command structure failing, the attack of the Eldar Armada lost its coherency, providing easier targets for Alator's fleet to destroy. The danger was not over though, as the way before the Craftworld was now saturated with the remnants of the Tyranid bioswarm. Although most of its creatures were likely dead, there was still the very real risk that some might still be alive and capable of drifting the short distance between space to infest the Craftworld as it passed through them. To prevent this, the Eldar Armada launched thousands of torpedoes into the area where the Tyranid bioships now drifted. These succeeded in destroying or blasting away any remaining Tyranid spores and creatures, and their efforts were so effective that the region is still marked upon Imperial Navy maps as a dead zone, centuries after the Eldar's armament was unleashed. Without Alatok's aid, and that of its Corsair allies, the resurrection of MYMERA's Phoenix Lord would not have been possible. Not only did the Craftworld bring the full force of its squadrons of grav tanks, Vipers, Nightwings and other vessels to bear against the Leman Russ and Chimera of Company Vengeance, but its Pathfinders and Aspect Warriors also stalked the icy depths of the Tormus Delta against Company Redemption. Alatok's efforts kept the Imperium's forces away from the ultimate objective of the Mymeran Farseer, the retrieval of his Craftworld's Phoenix Lord from the cave system below the Arastus 6 mining complex. That he succeeded is in no small part to them. Shadow Spectre Aspect Warriors. To an Eldar warrior, death in the mortal realm is no release from the endless war the survivors of his race fight. So few are they, as well, that the spirits of elite warriors are often required to fight on, forever trapped in the twilight realm between life and death. Rather than enter the infinity circuit of their Craftworld, their spirit stones are used to infuse life into Wraith constructs, such as the Wraith Lords and Wraith Guard. It is this aspect of Eldar warfare that the Shadow Spectres exemplify. Cain's demand that even the end of a mortal existence cannot be an escape from war. Many millennia ago, the aspect was closely associated with the Wraith Guard. Whilst the Wraith Guard are artificial life forms, animated with a living spirit, the Shadow Spectres are living, breathing spirits that have taken on the appearance of wraiths. Traditionally, all those that die on the path of the Shadow Spectres have, as part of the shrine's death rituals, had their spirit stones used to animate Wraithguard, and a cadre of these silent sentries always stand watch upon the shrine and march to war alongside their living kin. The Shadow Spectres are armed and equipped to predominantly hunt enemy heavy armor. Appearing like glowing ghostly shadows, they are surrounded by long gossamer robes that shimmer and writhe as if with a life of their own. Disguised behind hollow fields, they use their jetpacks' powered mobility to approach enemy targets, then, appearing as if from nowhere, unleash a sudden fusillade of precise and overwhelming fire. Their prism rifles are antiquated weapons, artifacts lost to most of the remaining Eldar race. Using the same technology as the far larger prism cannon, each rifle is connected to a single sophisticated targeting matrix known as the Ghost Light. Through it, each rifle's energy pulse converges into a single beam of bright light that shrieks as it tears apart tanks and larger targets with ease. The Aspect's armor also incorporates a large protective cowl, through which sensor and target information is collated. As ghost-like figures, the Shadow Spectres favour white and pale shades of grey and silver as their aspect colours, and on the battlefield their glimmering hollow suits disguise them. As they glide through the air, they appear as no more than a shimmering aura of pale light, only coalescing into their true forms when they fire their weapons. To the wider Eldar race, the Shadow Spectres are long forgotten, just another part of their culture lost to the cataclysm that destroyed their kin. Until the rediscovery of MYMERA, no Eldar Craftworld had an active shrine of the Shadow Spectres, and no Bone Singers knew the rituals to grow their aspect armor or weapons. On the largest Craftworlds, a few shrines remain, but they are now long abandoned places. During the Batalis Free incursion, the Shadow Spectres of the MYMERA Craftworld became a legend on the battlefield. The sight of them phasing in and out of sight sent those who survived their attacks mad with fear. The Eldar of Alatok and the Corsairs looked upon them, though, with hope, because if something from their distant past could return as they have, then maybe there are others of their lost kin still out in the galaxy for them to rediscover. Miralith, Shade of Twilight, Lost Phoenix Lord of the Shadow Spectres. Irilith was once a disciple of Ashuraman, first of the Eldar Phoenix Lords, and the founder of the Shrine of the Shadow Spectres on the MYMEARA Craftworld. The legends of Irilith are many, but one amongst them is entwined with the fate of the lost Craftworld. It tells the time of when, during his training under Ashuraman, Irilith was gifted with a terrible vision. In it, he saw the destruction of the Mymeran Craftworld at the hands of a race that was, even then, still in its infancy. Still, reeling from the near destruction of the Eldar race during the fall, Irilith vowed not to allow any more of his kin to be wiped out, and he set out to find the Craftworld and prepare it for the battles that lay ahead of them. Irilith searched the many paths of the webway for decades for his lost brethren, also imparting his skills upon other Craftworlds as he travelled, but their location always remained elusive. During this time, the legends of the Phoenix Lords also tell of the many great battles he fought against the creatures of Slaanesh that had infiltrated the great Eldar maze. Whilst the Phoenix Lord was exploring one particular region of the webway he had never come across in his travels of it before, he was confronted by a greater demon of Slaanesh who had broken through from the warp and had set about opening up sealed portals for its brethren to flood in through. As its demonic followers seared away yet more of the protective Eldar runes from their bindings on the portals, Irilith and the greater demon clashed. How long the battle lasted is unknown, as time flows strangely in places that are touched by the war, but eventually Irilith proved to be the victor and cast the terrible creature and its minions back from where they had come. The legends then tell that, exhausted by his titanic battle, the Phoenix Lord fell into a long, deep sleep, during which he was to be gifted with the knowledge of the Craftworld's location. Once he awoke, Irilith found the portal that led to the Mymeran Craftworld, and set about training its warriors in his ways of war, namely stealth, swiftness, and all-consuming firepower. Soon the day came, though, when he had to reveal his true purpose for being on the Craftworld. The Phoenix Lord spoke to the Council of Seers of his original vision and of the terrible fate that awaited them, but gave them hope of preventing it if he attacked their enemy now before it became unstoppable. Bowing to his wisdom, the Council of Seers allowed the Phoenix Lord to take with him nearly half of the Craftworld's warriors, and it was with a heavy heart that Irilith left that day using the very same portal he had arrived from, for since he had arrived on the Craftworld, his vision had altered. With his help, he knew now that the Craftworld would survive, but at the cost of his own life and all who came with him. What lay beyond that for the Craftworld he did not know, but he feared that to lose so many of their own would bring about its eventual demise regardless. For years, those left behind on the Craftworld waited for word of the Phoenix Lords and their war host's victory, but none came. Many decades passed, and the Mymerans had to accept that their brethren had undoubtedly been killed and that the Phoenix Lord had fallen. In truth, Irilith had succeeded in destroying the threat to the Craftworld, but had been struck down during the fierce fighting on the enemy race's homeworld, a place known in the Eldar legends as Belthalmir. There, the Phoenix Lord remained unrecovered. The cave where his body and war panoply lay was slowly covered beneath centuries of glacial deposited rocks as the planet's ice age advanced. But the Phoenix Lord was not dead. All Phoenix Lords are immortal, and like them, Irilith was no single warrior, but a collective of those that had become him, their souls held within the spirit stones that adorned his armor and war gear. So, Irilith remained trapped within the cave, where he had fought his final battle, his spirit awaiting the day he would be rediscovered, and the shade of twilight could be reborn. With his loss, Irilith's disciples and shrines also began to wane on other Craftworlds, as one by one, their shrines' exarchs died in battle. One by one, the shrines were deserted, becoming dark, haunted places, shunned by most Eldar. To them, it was just another part of their culture, lost in the downfall of their race. Eventually, the aspect became extinct, or so it was thought. The discovery of the location of Belthalmir, known to the Imperium as Betalis III, meant that Irilith could finally be recovered, while his war host and that of Alatok kept the guardsmen of the Imperium at bay. Bel Anath, the Farseer of MYMERA's Craftworld, led a mission to reanimate the spirit host of the Phoenix Lord, and succeeded. The Eldar's reward at the Battle of the Dawning Twilight, as the Batalis Free incursion is known to them, was Irilith, the Phoenix Lord of the Shadow Spectres reborn. Bel Anath, Farseer of the MYMERA Craftworld. When Irilith, the Phoenix Lord of the Shadow Spectres, met with MYMERA's Council of Seers to prevent the fate of their Craftworld, Bel Anath was one amongst them. Although already centuries old, he was still the youngest of the Farseers there, having only taken the path of the Seer decades previously. Prior to taking his first steps along this most dangerous path the Craftworld Eldar can take, he had fought for his people in many guises. To prevent the mistakes of the Eldar race's past from happening again, those of the Craftworld place strict controls over their lives. In order to temper their inner demons, they choose to follow a discipline until they have completely mastered it. The intention is that it focuses the Eldar's mind so that he is not distracted by the many temptations the galaxy holds, restricting him to just one aspect of life and taming his natural inclinations towards experience of all things to the extreme. Once the discipline, or path, as it is known, has been mastered, then the Eldar will move on to another. Bel Anath, like many of his kind, followed the path of the warrior and its many aspects for most of the first half of his life. He did not spend all of this part of his life on this path though, stepping first onto the path of the outcast. Although, as with others who have chosen this path, it is not well known amongst his kin for fear that more of his brethren might choose to follow suit. Born long after the fall, Bel Anath lived amongst Eldar that the disciplining nature of the Eldar paths had not yet fully tamed. Indeed, there were many upon the MYMERA Craftworld who still struggled to control the extremes of their soul at that time. Although their guardians shielded them as best they could, MYMERA's young could not help but be influenced by these troubled creatures. Eventually, all who could not master their impulses were banished by MYMERA's Council of Seers or chose a life of exile themselves, the first of the Craftworld to leave it for the path of the outcast. The damage, though, was already done. Learning from them that there was so much more in the galaxy, the young Bel Anath could not yet resolve himself to a life of self-imposed discipline. Instead, he chose exile. The portals the MYMERAns still kept open to the webway at that time enabled him to leave the life he had known since birth. How long it took for Bel Anath to master his restlessness and what he did during that time is unknown, nor have any spoke of it with him. When he did return, the young Eldar was no longer bound by his desire to explore the galaxy. That he had seen conflict whilst an outcast could not be denied, and perhaps was one of the reasons for his return. To master that part of his psyche through taking the path of the warrior. Although it kept to the less populated areas of space on its voyage, the Craftworld could not completely avoid the attentions of other races. Bel Anath was to test his control over his warrior nature on many occasions, although those who kept a close eye upon the reformed outcast noted that his skills in battle were already well honed compared to that of his Craftworld-bound kin. Against the empire of the Tagan Knights, as they are known in the ballads sung on Bel Anath's life, he was part of the war host sent to destroy a portal that linked directly with one on his Craftworld. The portal was located in the catacombs below the planet's city, where the followers of Slanesh were attempting to activate it. The city was a heavily fortified stronghold, but no match for the Eldar, and the squad Bel Anath was in launched itself upon the gun emplacements surrounding the city, its exarch blazing the way forward for them as the desire to wage war overcame him. Using their fusion guns, the squad mercilessly immolated those within the emplacements. When the enemy weapons fire was too intense for even Bel Anath's squad, other fire dragons would move in and obliterate the target with fire pikes and melter bombs, paving the way for the remaining war host to hunt through the catacombs and destroy the portal. The years in which he gained mastery of the fire dragon aspect moderated Bel Anath's fury for battle. His soul calmed. He then moved on through the other aspects, mastering each facet of the path of the warrior before moving on to a new path. The renegade forge world of Pharos 6 was where Bel Anath would first lead MYMERA's war host to war as its autarch, completing his journey along the path of command. His mind honed by years defending his craftworld, the warrior leader finally cast off the dark shadow that had haunted him since he had first left as an outcast. Directing all aspects of the MYMERA warhost, Bel-Anath led them into the depths of the Forge World's massive orbiting dockyards, where they fought against weapon automatons, bristling with guns and hideous mutated creatures, part human but mostly machine, that had once been its tech priests, but who had since been reshaped by the whims of the Chaos Gods. Destroying the Renegade's fleet before it could be launched against the approaching Craftworld, Bel-Anath once more prevented the destruction of his people. Since that, and many other battles, Bel-Anath has followed the path of the Seer. This not only saw him take part in the council session addressed by the Phoenix Lord, but also the resurrection of Irileth in the caves below Betalis Free. The Farseer's years of leadership have brought hope to his people, that perhaps they may survive whatever lays ahead for them. The Eldar Corsairs. An Eldar Corsair is more akin to the Eldar before the Fall than those who now live upon the Craftworlds. Not for them are the highly disciplined paths trod by their Craftworld kin, although many may turn to them once their need to explore the galaxy and all that it has to offer has been satiated. That is though if they have not completely turned in their lot with their dark kin who dwell in the depths of Camorra. Since its rediscovery by the Rangers of Aletok, the location of MYMERA Craftworld, deep in the heart of what is known to the Imperium as the Carina Nebula, has attracted numerous Corsair bands. While they are very young, most Eldar will have heard the song of the lost children of the Eldar. In essence, it is a prophecy, and one which is believed to set out the fate of the MYMERAN Craftworld. In fleeing from the predations of the Chaos God Slanesh, the Eldar in the legend are said to have been cursed by She Who Thirsts, who promised a slow, torturous death for all who escaped its clutches during the fall. Like the Eldar world in the prophecy, the MYMERA Craftworld stands alone at the center of the vast region encompassed by the Carina Nebula, and its hunt for its lost brethren and Phoenix Lord has struck a chord with the Corsairs, who were drawn by this suffering it has undergone. Many are already aligned with Aletok and are therefore aware of its existence already. Others have journeyed from light years around, drawn by the mystery and legends that surround their lost kin. Little time was therefore required to launch an assault on the worlds of the Betalis system when it was discovered that the remains of the Phoenix Lord Irilaf lay upon the third planet, and as the war hosts of MYMERA and Aletok were mustering their forces, the Corsair bands had already set forth. Although not as heavily defended as most Imperial worlds, Betalis Free still had a strong planetary defence force that had been joined by the remnants of the Cadian 6th Armoured Regiment. The raids to destroy the Ice World's global surveillance network suited the hit-and-run tactics of the Eldar Corsairs. Using the many cargo transports that flew to the planet, they evaded the Imperial Navy fleet in the system and easily slipped past its orbital defences. Once on the planet, the Corsairs launched hit-and-run attacks on its isolated outposts, achieving their original objective and then remained to take part in all 3 major land battles. True to their darker nature, not all of the Eldar Corsairs stayed on Betalis Free's eastern continent during the war. With the rest of the Iceworld's population poorly defended, it was no surprise to those of the Imperium who'd had dealings with the Corsair bands before that once the Eldar war hosts had retreated from Betalis Free, entire communities that had lived out in this icy wilderness had simply vanished. Evidence collected by Imperial authorities points to there being 3 distinct bands of Eldar Corsairs joined with the Eldar warhost. The Sky Raiders. The end of the Betalis Free incursion saw the full-scale retreat of the warhosts of Aletok and MYMERA, harried by the thousands of Imperial reinforcements that had recently landed on the planet. They suffered significant casualties, but these were nowhere near the numbers lost by the Eldar Corsair bands in the battle fought near the Carina Nebula immediately afterwards. One of many Corsair bands allied with the 2 main Eldar factions, the Sky Raiders became notorious for the viciousness of their attacks, and later analysis of the remains of their victims was commonly mistaken by less experienced adepts for attacks more akin to those made by Dark Eldar hunting cadres. Due to the ferocious reputation they gained in the war, during the Battle of the Carina Nebula, boarding assaults upon ships belonging to the Sky Raiders were spearheaded by Bran Redmore's Great Company. This resulted in very few of the Corsairs on board surviving, and those ships which did escape were all reported to have been heavily damaged. The Sunblitz Brotherhood, believed by the Ordo Xenos to be aligned with Craftworld Eldar, during the battle for the Batalis system, the pilots of the Sunblitz Brotherhood fleets were ultimately responsible for the destruction of the Watchful Savior, Batalis Free's orbital defense platform. Later, the Sunblitz Brotherhood temporarily allied with the ships of the Void Dragon Corsair cadre to patrol the inner regions of the Batalis system. Wreckage recovered from the system after the war indicates that the alliance was tenuous at best, as it appears more than one Sunblitz craft was damaged by Void Dragon weaponry during that time. The Void Dragons. Perhaps the most infamous and dangerous Eldar Corsair band during the war was the Void Dragons. Operating across the galaxy, the Imperial Navy estimates they command a fleet in excess of 3,500 ships and have been encountered in places as far apart as the Cadian Gate, the distant Tau Empire, and the Halo Stars. Currently under the leadership of the haughty Princess Sariana, the Void Dragons' attacks hold no predictable pattern, and range from ambushes against Chaos Raiders near the Eye of Terror to the mass enslavement of the penal colony of Varan 7, to fighting against Orks of the Empire of Caradon. The Corsairs tend to be more active than the Eldar of the Craftworlds, who naturally look first to their own defense. Corsair bands are more aggressive, always seeking opportunities to raid. To what end, the Imperium can only guess. Some Corsair bands seem to be very closely allied with a Craftworld, such as the Eldritch Raiders with Iandan or Zion's Black Raiders with Ulfwi. But others seem to have complete autonomy, attacking wherever and whatever they can. All Eldar Corsair bands are nomadic. They might menace a sector for a short time, making several raids before moving on. Few have any easily identifiable geographic area of operation, which might allow their enemies to find and destroy them. For them, it is better to remain mobile, so they are difficult to find and hard to effectively counter. Although the Corsair band will have many fast ships, they can also have their own secret bases, well hidden deep in a nebula or asteroid field. A Corsair band's havens take many forms. Some are ancient and forgotten Eldar stations, leftover remnants of bases from before the fall. Others are temporary, hidden in long-abandoned asteroid mines or deep in wilderness space. The largest bands will have many bases and hideouts scattered across the galaxy. Corsair bands can also have bases of operation around the Exodite worlds. Many have long-standing alliances with the Exodite houses, providing these isolated worlds with a degree of orbital protection in return for a safe haven and occasionally military aid. A typical Corsair attack will be a rapidly moving, low-orbital raid, deploying fast from vampire raiders, striking with aggression and speed and then quickly withdrawing. The Corsairs are not well equipped for extended battles or campaigns, and would find a pitched battle against a well-armed foe difficult, although a Corsair prince will often have the heavier support of Nightwings or Phoenix bomber aircraft to call upon. But a Corsair band will generally avoid fighting at a disadvantage if they have to. Corsairs also commonly use boarding actions against poorly defended freighters and transports. At close quarters, their lack of heavy weapons and specialised grav tanks is not a hindrance. Corsair princes are not above hiring themselves out as mercenaries to the highest bidder. During lean times, a band might find temporary employment with a rebel planetary governor, mutinous Imperial Guard commander, or other renegades from the Imperium's justice. For their employer, this is a desperate measure, because those Imperial servants that seek their aid can expect no mercy from the Emperor's Inquisition. On occasion, Eldar Craftworlds and Corsair bands have gone to war with each other. The Imperium is unclear as to why, but it is possible that some Corsair bands have strayed too far down the dark path, and the Eldar have been forced to move against them, rather than allow them to fall en masse into the clutches of the Archons of Camorra. There may also be long-standing rivalries and old scores to be settled between different Eldar factions. but such conflicts are rarely understood by the Imperium's authorities. Due to its access to many rare and ancient Eldar technologies, the MYMERANs were able to bring forth variants of Eldar weapon systems that have rarely, if ever, been encountered by the Imperium before, as well as the usual war machines of the Eldar. The Falcon. The Eldar's main battle tank is the Falcon, a fast, mobile and well-protected grav tank carrying excellent anti-tank and anti-infantry firepower. In addition to the Falcon's considerable assets, it can also transport a small squad of aspect warriors or Eldar guardians into battle, and its split-wing design and single-seat turrets are a familiar sight to those enemy tank crews that face the Eldar on the battlefield. The key to the Falcon's battlefield performance is its engine and anti-gravitic generators. The Eldar are masters of anti-grav technology, utilizing it as readily as mankind uses tank tracks. Their advanced technology means the Falcon's engines can generate an estimated top speed of 800 kilometers per hour. Its advanced anti-grav generators are also capable of limited flight, climbing higher than the equivalent Imperial craft and thus giving them the added edge of altitude, allowing them to swoop down onto the battlefield at high speed, weapons locked on to their pre-selected targets. Each Falcon has a crew of 2, the pilot and the gunner. These will be already experienced warriors, having most likely learned their skills within jetbike squadrons or along other similar paths, who intuitively handle the Falcon's complex and delicate control systems using both their mind and body. As befits its versatile battlefield role, the Falcon's armament is also very adaptive. Alongside its standard high-energy rapid pulsar, the Falcon can be equipped for just about any role, be it anti-infantry with scatter laser and shuriken cannon, or dealing with light armor with star cannon, or in an anti-tank role with a bright lance or missile launcher. The Falcon forms a keystone of the Eldar's armoured warfare tactics, supported by fire prisms, firestorms and night spinners. An armoured host will first move at speed to outflank and then surround an enemy force, striking at top speed and withdrawing before the enemy's anti-tank weapons can be deployed to face them. A Falcon flight, sometimes referred to as a cloud strike squadron, can rapidly change position and strike again from another direction, breaking up an enemy's defensive cohesion or attack formations before the main Eldar assault hits. It is believed that the Falcon, the title is the official Ordo Dialogus translation from the true Eldar name, is named for Fealuku, a character from the Eldar race's long and complex mythical creation story, known as the War of Heaven. Fealuku was the friend and companion of the Great Hawk, a messenger of the Eldar gods who, according to myth, stole Vol's sword, Anaris, and gave it to the hero Eldanash, so that he might fight and defeat the war god Cain. Fire Prism. Mounting a powerful prism cannon, the Fire Prism is a dedicated tank hunter. The Imperium have yet to unravel the heretical technology of the prism cannon, having been able to seize very few undamaged specimens from the battlefield. It is believed, though, that contained within its structure there is a large crystal prism which traps and intensifies light, and then focuses the resultant energy through a second prismatic lens, focusing it again into a single beam or scattering it over a wide area. Night Spinner. Utilizing the Eldar's knowledge of monofilament technology, a Night Spinner is used as mobile light artillery, which is deployed to support fast-moving Eldar formations. Its Doomweavers fire a cloud of monofilament web high into the sky. This then floats down to the ground, slicing through anything unfortunate enough to be caught under it. Firestorm. The Firestorm is the Eldar's standard anti-aircraft defense vehicle, which utilizes the Falcon's hull. It mounts a complex triple-barreled array of scatter lasers in a single-seated turret that fills the sky with streaking laser bolts above an Eldar grav tank formation. Highly accurate and capable of sustained bursts, the Firestorm is also a potent anti-infantry weapon, particularly effective when used against hordes such as Ork warbands and Tyranid swarms. During the Batalis Free incursion, the Eldar Corsairs were the first to employ one of the many variants based on the Falcon chassis. Deployed during the battle at Alniatak, from their vessels in orbit. Their Falcon squadrons were used in Coyote Strike formations to attack Battle Group Eptida's vulnerable heavy weapons platforms. The Falcon formations were perfect for the role, speeding in low and quick over the leading edge of the Bragan Glacier and unleashing a volley of destructive firepower before breaking away and arcing back around past the Alnitak facility for another sortie. When forces from Craftworld MYMEARA engaged with Company Vengeance on the Elatian Plains, it was a rare opportunity for the Imperium observers to see firsthand the devastation that the fire prism can cause. Before the fall of the Eldar race millennia before, the original worlds of the MYMERA on the edge of the Eldar Empire were renowned for the quality and craftsmanship of their machines of war, as well as being one of the primary worlds to produce the monolithic Phantom Titan, also seen on Batalis 3. They were also able to create the crystals required for the Fire Prism's main weapon, the Prism Cannon. Many of the artisans and weaponsmiths conversant with this technology were lost, along with a large proportion of MYMERA's warhost, when the Phoenix Lord Irilith led them to war centuries before. Despite this, the MYMERA Craftworld still possessed a number of the craft within its flight chambers, and these were put to great effect during the Batalis 3 incursion. Eyewitness accounts attribute the MYMERA fire prisms with the highest number of confirmed kills amongst Company Vengeance's Leman Russ and Chimera, and amongst their tally was counted the Hydra flak gun and its crew, which had earlier destroyed a Corsair Nightwing. As the battle progressed into a bloody stalemate, reports were also recorded of fire prism crews combining their firepower, particularly when engaging the more heavily armoured super heavy tanks, such as the Praetor armoured assault launcher. By bringing the beams of two fire prism vessels together, the Eldar were able to penetrate the heavily armoured hulls that had proved impervious to lesser weapons. Although highly effective, this tactic undoubtedly slowed down the Eldar rate of attrition against Vengeance, which could have been considerably higher. Wave Serpent. The Eldar race's principal armoured transport is the Wave Serpent, a sleek, anti-gravity vehicle based upon the Falcon chassis. The Wave Serpent sacrifices the Falcon's firepower for its additional transport capacity. Operating alongside the Falcons, flights of Wave Serpents swiftly carry squads of Aspect Warriors and Guardians across the battlefield, well protected inside their armoured hull and behind sophisticated energy fields. As a Wave Serpent races across the battlefield, it projects a uniquely powerful energy field ahead of it. The Eldar have an intimate knowledge of energy and disruption field technology, utilizing it over the encumbering and slow armor of other races. The Wave Serpent's wings mount the field projector fins, and these create a shimmering bow wave, which absorbs and dissipates the energy of any lesser blasts, projectiles, or explosions that pass through it. Its fields can also be combined together, so that with the Wave Serpents flying in tight formation, the individual fields reinforce each other, becoming even stronger. With the aid of a shield enhancer, this shimmering wall of energy can also be used at close range as an offensive weapon, unleashing a tsunami-like tide wave that smashes over the enemy. This sudden shock is rarely actually lethal, but it will disorientate, stun, and sometimes paralyze those close by, as well as causing any delicate electrical systems to overload. With the crackling force wave unleashed, the Aspect Warriors within can then deploy in relative safety, moving in to destroy the disorientated foe before it can recover. As well as its formidable force field, each Wave Serpent will also provide supporting fire for its deploying passengers, with its small remote-controlled turret-mounted twin-linked heavy weapons, while it carries additional shuriken catapults in a chin mount for close anti-personnel defense. The rear of the Wave Serpent incorporates a transport compartment large enough to carry up to 12 fully armed and armoured Aspect Warriors or Guardians, or even 5 towering Wraithguard. Each Wave Serpent has a single crewman who pilots the vehicle and controls its remote weapon system. Wave Serpent-born infantry are perhaps the core of the archetypical Eldar assault force. Aspect Warriors striking fast and with precision from the flanks of an enemy force. After earlier attacks have divided the enemy's strength as they attempt to intercept the Eldar's repeated feints and hit-and-run strikes, the Aspect Warriors will then leap from their transports to engage the enemy at close quarters. An aspect assault wave combines the specialization of all the aspects into a single deadly whole, each unit complementing the others so that few enemies can match them for skill, training, or unity of purpose. A Serpent Rider host, consisting of Guardians, lacks the former's lethal cutting edge, and the Guardians are rarely at the forefront of battle. It is more likely that this force will be providing flank protection for the main attack, or be deployed as a mobile and rapid reserve formation, called forward only at need. The Warp Hunter. The rarest of the Falcon modifications yet encountered by the Imperium's fighting force is designated the Warp Hunter, a high-speed assault craft mounting a large distortion cannon through its hull. Like the Fire Prism and Night Spinner, the Warp Hunter sacrifices its transport capacity for its change in weaponry. Amongst the Eldar, the Warp Hunter is considered a rather archaic vehicle, and given the nature of its weaponry, some Craftworlds seem to be reticent in fielding large numbers of them. Eldar Corsair bands, though, appear to have no such compunctions. During the fighting on Batalis Free, the Warp Hunter was identified in greater numbers than ever before. Whereas a single sighting might be an unusual event, several squadrons of Warp Hunters were engaged during the Battle of Al-Nitak. This may indicate that the MYMERA Craftworld was in possession of a larger than usual number of these antiquated vehicles, as were the Corsair bands that took part in the invasion. The distortion cannon, commonly referred to by certain lower echelons of the Imperium as the D-cannon, is another of the Eldar race's many unusual weapons. The technology of the weapon is little known or understood by the Adeptus Mechanicus and considered highly heretical. Any Magos found to be dabbling with such dangerous Xenos technology can expect the strongest measures against them from the Inquisition. Draconian measures have been enforced against the Adeptus Mechanicus since 755299 M40, when unsanctioned work with warp technology resulted in the contagion of Eridanus, and required the deployment of a Grey Knight's rapid strike force to quell the resulting demonic incursion. When fired, a D-cannon projects a miniature sphere of warp energy, tearing its target apart and dragging its hapless victims to a terrible death, exposed to the raw material of the warp itself. Larger weapons are able to generate bigger spheres, but require vast amounts of energy to safely contain them, so can only be mounted upon larger chassis. The largest such weapons are mounted upon the Cobra and Phantom Titan. Uniquely, by adjusting the weapon's warp real space disruption focus and its warp core containment field generator, the Warp Hunter's D-cannon can briefly create an aether rift. Projected a short distance in front of the vehicle, a seething mass of dark energy is unleashed, which sweeps the enemy from its prow. In common with other Falcon variants, the Warp Hunter is also equipped with 2 shuriken catapults for close anti-infantry defense. Like all Eldar vehicles, the heart of the Warp Hunter is the psychosensitive wraithbone chassis over which are laid psychoplastics, formed by the Bone Singers using psychic pressure. These materials are light and immensely strong, and have become synonymous with the Eldar race, as no others have mastered their unique construction techniques. These can imbue seemingly inanimate and functional items with a life force or spirit, attuned to the Eldar race's innate psychic sensitivity. This also means their advanced vehicles and weapons cannot be replicated, and no other race can operate them. The occasional sanctioned attempts to activate captured and damaged Eldar vehicles and weapons by secret Ordo Xenos investigation teams have all resulted in complete failure and the loss of many test-bed servitors. Like other Eldar grab vehicles, the Warp Hunter has a 2-man team, comprising a pilot and a gunner, who are concealed inside the tank's hull, operating the main weapon's targeting equipment. The Wraith Lord and Wraith Seer. When an Eldar spirit passes beyond the mortal realm, it becomes ever fainter, receding deeper into the long, dark sleep of death. But by the arcane power and knowledge of warlock spirit seers, an Eldar spirit can be recalled. Once recalled, their spirit stones are used to reanimate wraithbone constructs, the Ghost Warriors. First of these are the Wraithguard, the foot soldiers of the spirit host. Next come the tall, graceful, and statuesque Wraith Lords, regarded as precious artifacts. The Wraith Lords are still treated by their former ranks, and attend many of the Eldar Council sessions when planning a war or raid. An Eldar Autarch will often draw upon the Wraith Lord's millennia of experience. But the immortal spirit of an Eldar cannot retain the same bright spark of consciousness as that of a mortal. They exist part in the spirit realm, part in the mortal realm, with reality occurring around them as if in a dream-like stasis. They can easily become vague and lose focus, momentarily adrift in the spirit realm again. It is the Spirit Seer's task to keep the Wraith Lords and Wraith Guards a connection to the mortal realm strong. A Wraith Lord can be equipped with any weaponry, supporting the Eldar infantry with heavy weapons fire, or charging forward with the Aspect Warriors, armed with fearsome Wraith Blades. Both the Alatok and MYMERA Craftworlds brought their Wraith Lords to Betalis free, and the discovery of the remains of the Phoenix Lord on the planet saw many of them emerge from the webway into the thick of the battle at the Tormus Delta, only to come face to face with the Space Wolves from Bran Redmoor's great company. Many eons ago, warlocks of great power that passed into the spirit realm could be summoned to aid a Craftworld again. The warlock's mortal spirit was contained within the Wraithbone matrix of a Wraith Lord, becoming a Wraith Seer, rare and precious beyond compare. The Wraith Seers are to the Eldar's spirit host what a warlock is to Aspect Warriors and Guardians, a war leader. There are now very few Wraith Seers on the Craftworlds, and it is believed that the Spirit Seers no longer have the knowledge or skill to reanimate them. As such, they are a precious indeed. Each loss is keenly felt, and rarely can be risked upon the battlefield. Armed with a distortion cannon and Wraith Blade, and wreathed in eldritch energy, although ancient, a Wraith Seer is still a potent foe. Marching at the head of a spirit host, wordlessly guiding their actions, the Spirit Seers still retain many of their former powers and instinct for battle. Eldar legends tell that a few Wraith Seers still remain trapped upon their old colony worlds, buried as the leaders of a world spirit host, but are now long lost. If they could be found, then they could perhaps be reclaimed. One such Wraith Seer was Fiala Theandral, a leader of Alatok Craftworld. It was while searching the webway, and the worlds that lie beyond it, for the Wraith Seers that Alatok's rangers discovered the portal that led them to lost Craftworld MYMERA. The Hornet. The Hornet is a small, single-seater attack craft deployed by Eldar armoured forces in a fast reconnaissance and raiding role. It can be found at the forefront of Eldar armoured attacks, speeding ahead of the main force of Falcons and Wave Serpents, often operating alongside other high-speed attack crafts such as jet bikes and Vipers. A versatile vehicle, the Hornet can be fitted to effectively engage any target, from anti-infantry firepower with shuriken cannons and scatter lasers, through star cannon and missile launchers, to precision anti-tank fire with bright lances, or even larger pulse lasers. The vehicle's amazing straight-line speed, maneuverability and size also make it popular with Corsair raiders, perfectly complementing their modus operandi. The Craftworld of Sam-Han has also been observed by the Ordo Xenos utilising large numbers of Hornets in support of their wild riders, bringing the agents of the Emperor's Inquisition to the conclusion that it was the Bone Singers of Sam-Han that first developed the design, which has now spread to other Craftworlds. Even by the Eldar race's high standards, the Hornet's engine is a wonder of its kind. With an estimated top speed of 600 km per hour, the attack craft is also capable of limited short-range atmospheric flight. Hornet pilots will often have served time riding jet bikes and Vipers, this making them veterans and masters of the tactics of high-speed combat. On Betalis Free, Eldar Hornets were heavily engaged during the initial assault upon Battle Group Mtida at Alnitak, and in the skirmishes against the convoy deploying Company Retribution into the Tormus Delta in the south of the Aletian Plains, where their anti-tank armament reaped even greater destruction. Unable to play a major role at the Tormus Delta, the Hornet squadrons headed north where their high-speed hit-and-run role could be used against Leman Russ and Chimera of Company Vengeance. As the battle developed to favour the orchestrated barrages of the Cadian 6th Crews, most of the Hornet squadrons were redeployed to the rear area to patrol, harassing Imperial vehicles that strayed too far from their comrades. The Lynx. The Lynx is a sleek, heavily armoured craft, near invisible to the arcane tracking devices of the Imperium, and is the epitome of the advanced technological skills of the ancient Eldar race. Previously unknown until the appearance of the war host of Craftworld MYMEARA and Batalis Free, the Lynx is a heavy grav tank, superficially similar to the Scorpion but believed by some of the Adeptus Mechanicus who have been allowed access to images of the vessel by certain unorthodox elements of the Inquisition to be more of an antiquated design. As a newly encountered craft, the Ordo Xenos has yet to quantify its threat, but what has been ascertained from combat reports from those who fought on Batalis Free, it appears the vehicle lacks the very heavy firepower of a Scorpion or Cobra, being situated somewhere between the standard Falcon and the Scorpion in terms of armament. What it lacks in firepower, it more than makes up for in speed and maneuverability. During the Batalis Free incursion, the Lynx fulfilled the same role that the Scorpion does for the Eldar Craftworlds, being used at the spear point of the attack and supporting other grav tank squadrons in a heavy armour capacity, armed with a single pulsar or, more rarely, a sonic lance. It also has a secondary heavy weapon mounted under the cockpit. Eldar Lynx squadrons did not appear until late on in the battle on the Elatian Plains. It was originally assumed by the Ordo Xenos that this was because the commanders of the Mimaran host were reticent to deploy their Lynx reserves until absolutely necessary, or that their arrival may have been reliant upon sufficient intelligence being provided by their brethren to enable them to concentrate their attacks where they would be most devastating. The main engagement between the Craftworld MYMERA Lynx squadrons and Company Vengeance was concentrated close to the mountainous canyons surrounding the northeast of the frozen plains. Working their way across land from their portal on the west coast of the continent, the Lynx squadrons were able to fly low and at high speed through the mountains on the northern edge of the battlefield, expertly masking their approach before they launched an assault upon Company Vengeance's eastern flank. Unprepared for an attack from such an unexpected quarter, losses were high, and once again General Odin was forced to change tactics to meet this new danger. Analysis after the war by the adepts of the Ordo Xenos suggests that the Lynx attack may have been part of a diversion intended to keep Company Vengeance's commanders occupied, whilst the Marmaran Farseer's convoy made its way past them to the Aresta 6 mining facility. The Lynx squadrons eventually suffered serious losses themselves during the heavy fighting later in the battle. Several were confirmed destroyed during a counter-attack by a combination of Company Vengeance and Space Wolf forces. It is yet to be seen whether this newly identified heavy grav tank remains unique to the MYMERA Craftworld, or if the skills of its production have reached the other Craftworlds. In particular, that of their allies Craftworld Alatok. As a matter of priority, any future encounters reported by the Imperium's forces will receive the full attention of the Ordo Xenos. The Scorpion and Cobra. Whilst the Falcons, Fire Prisms, Night Spinners and Firestorms form the backbone of the Eldar race's swift armoured attack waves, they are often supported by heavy grav tanks, designated as the Scorpion and the Cobra. These huge vehicles carry very heavy firepower, and are broadly comparable to Imperial Guard super heavy tanks. Scorpions are amongst the largest vehicles recorded capable of anti-gravitic movement. Known to the Eldar as engines of Vol, it combines the sophisticated and powerful weaponry with the grace and speed that have come to be associated with Eldar vehicles. It is protected by hollow fields and armed with 2 turret-mounted pulsars and a secondary shuriken cannon for anti-infantry defense. The Scorpion's main role seems to be as a tank hunter, engaging and destroying enemy armor at long range. Such is its effectiveness that it has become widely feared by Imperial Guard tank crews, earning it the nickname Gravemaker and Death Sled. The Cobra is another of the engines of Vor, much like the Scorpion, but rearmed with a large D cannon. Designed to find and destroy enemy war machines, their protective force fields are little defense against the D cannon's heinous energies. The Cobra has little other weaponry, as its only role is to seek out and destroy the largest enemy war machines. As with all Eldar vehicles, crew numbers are kept to a minimum. The dwindling civilization of the Eldar means they must rely upon sophisticated technology and the wraithbone construction of their vehicles, freeing more warriors from crewman duties to fill the ranks of Guardian and Aspect warrior squads. Alatok and MYMEARA's Scorpions and Cobras played a leading role in the battle on the Elatian Plains during the Batalis Free incursion. Scorpion pulsar fire accounted for many of the destroyed Imperial vehicles left littering the icy wilderness. After the fighting, the wrecks of 5 Scorpions were recorded by Administratum auditors. Cobra losses were unknown. The Nightwing. The Eldar race's frontline combat aircraft is the infamous Nightwing. Hated by all enemies of the Eldar, it is a sleek and deadly aircraft, capable of outmatching just about any other aircraft in the sky. The Nightwing is the pinnacle of Eldar aircraft technology, a superbly designed fighter interceptor that provides Eldar Craftworld forces and Eldar Corsair raiding parties with the decisive edge in aerial combat. Utilizing the Eldar's sophisticated anti-gravity technology, the Nightwing is capable of aerobatic feats most Imperial Navy pilots would consider impossible. The Nightwing is extremely fast in a straight line, utilizing its swept wing design for extra speed. With its wings in a backward position, it can easily outpace any Imperial Navy fighter. For extreme maneuvers, the wings sweep forward, allowing the Nightwing to pull high-speed, high-G turns and brake the aircraft very rapidly during a dogfight. Eldar pilots master this maneuver, suddenly braking and swerving hard to throw off pursuit. Dogfighting is where the Nightwing really excels. It is not heavily armed for ground attack missions, although its bright lances are still powerful enough to destroy enemy tanks should the opportunity present itself. For specialist ground attack missions, the Eldar usually turn to the Nightwing's larger cousin, the Phoenix. The Nightwing's armament is primarily designed for engaging and destroying enemy aircraft. Like other Eldar vehicles, the Nightwing relies on speed and agility to avoid damage rather than armor. The Nightwing is protected from enemy fire by image distortion hollow fields. The field generator makes it difficult for enemy targets to lock on to the Nightwing, and throws out false images which can confuse enemy pilots. The Nightwing pilots are almost always young Eldar who have yet to travel the darker aspect paths. Many do have previous experience as jet bike riders, or from crewing Vipers or Falcons. Those with the desire and the aptitude may then move on to fly Nightwings. Many pilots will also move on to walk the path of the outcast, the heady lure of fighting at such extreme speeds, triggering their suppressed bloodlust and emotions. And Eldar Corsair bands are often well equipped with Nightwings to support their lightning raids. The Phoenix. The Phoenix has many features in common with the Nightwing, but lacks the straight line speed and top-end maneuverability of the fighter, instead carrying a larger weapons payload for its role as a ground attack fighter. Despite its loss of speed, the Phoenix is still an outstanding aircraft, capable of tangling with most enemy fighter aircraft and still coming out on top. The Phoenix's weapons load includes 2 nose-mounted shuriken cannons, primarily for use against enemy aircraft. Below the fuselage is a single centerline mounted pulse laser, a powerful, rapid-firing laser weapon used for pinpoint accuracy against hard targets. The fuselage also holds the Phoenix's main ground attack weapons, 2 rapid-discharge Eldar missile launchers armed with plasma missiles. These area saturation weapons obliterate a target in a hail of expanding plasma explosions. The Phoenix has 2 crew, 1 pilot to fly the aircraft, whilst the co-pilot operates the weapons system, and the aircraft is well protected inside a disruptive hollow field. Like all Eldar aircraft, the Phoenix is constructed of complex psychoplastics, formed into solid shapes under psychic pressure by the Eldar's bone singers. The fuselage is reinforced by wraithbone for extra strength and resilience. This also means the crew will be psychically attuned to their craft, improving response times and allowing the pilots to control the aircraft with utmost efficiency. Phoenix are common throughout all the Eldar craftworlds and amongst Eldar Corsair bands. Those aircraft from craftworlds bear the usual colours associated with them. Corsair bands use more flamboyant colour schemes and motifs, often allowing pilots to individually decorate their aircraft with flames, skulls and mythical beasts being common devices. The Eldar race's long history of warfare has taught them the value of such air power, and their aircraft have been developed to give them aerial supremacy over any battlefield they must fight on, against any foe, with Nightwings flying as escort cover to intercept and destroy enemy fighters. This clears the way for the Phoenix to swoop in low against enemy ground targets. During the Battle of the Elatian Plains, the Phoenix provided the Eldar Craftworlds and Corsairs with their primary ground attack weapons. A Phoenix-led airstrike was responsible for much of the destruction wrought upon the tanks and heavy guns of Battle Group Eptida at Alnitak. The Vampire Raider and Vampire Hunter. The Vampire Raider is the largest atmospheric aircraft yet encountered. Although as a dropship, it can also operate in the hard vacuum of space. It is used primarily as transport for Eldar assault forces, descending from orbiting spacecraft to strike at their targets before quickly withdrawing. As a dropship, it is highly favoured by Eldar Corsair bands, which make wide use of vampires to drop and land their raiding parties. For its size, the Vampire is fast, agile and well-armed, mainly for supporting fire as it approaches a landing zone. It has a nose-mounted scatter laser and 2 underslung hardpoints, which mount twin-linked pulse lasers. It also utilises hollow fields for protection. When vampires are required to land troops into dangerous landing zones, then they usually fly with an escort of Nightwings. A vampire can carry up to 30 troops in its passenger compartments and has 2 crew, a pilot and co-pilot. Other variants of the standard Raider have been identified, usually upgraded with heavier weapons as ground attack bombers and as heavy transports, gravatic hooks locking on to a Falcon or Wave Serpent. The heaviest armed Vampire Raider variant has been reclassified as the Hunter. The Vampire Hunter is the variant of the Vampire Raider converted for use as a heavy ground attack bomber rather than as a troop shuttle. It forgoes any transport capacity for additional heavy armament and carries massive pulsars and multiple missile launchers. The Vampire Hunter is a super heavy gunship capable of taking on the heaviest enemy units, including Titans, and is only deployed onto the fiercest battlefields against large targets. They fly on missions to engage specific enemy targets such as attacking Titans, and each Vampire Hunter will usually have its own Nightwing escort cover to support its attack runs and keep enemy aircraft at bay. The Hunter is just one of several identified variants of the standard Vampire, usually carrying different armament, deployed by different Craftworlds and Corsair bands. Despite its heavy weapons load, the Hunter retains the Vampire's amazing maneuverability and speed for such a large aircraft, and like all Eldar aircraft, is protected by its hollow field. On Batalis Free, the Vampire Raiders were extensively used by Corsair bands, delivering their forces in on jump packs from high altitude. Very few Hunters were identified, and were concentrated in the attacks upon Battle Group Eptida at Alnitak. The Revenant Titan. The smallest of the Eldar Titans is the Revenant, built for grace and beauty over the more functional machines of the Imperium's Titan legions. All Eldar Titans are tall, slim and graceful in their movements, by the standards of towering war machines, which allows them to move swiftly and smoothly into battle. To aid its combat speed, the Revenant is also equipped with advanced jump jets and gravitic motors, allowing it to leap, clearing difficult terrain and advancing quickly to harass the enemy, before firing its jets again and withdrawing with equal speed. The principal weaponry of the Revenant is the feared Pulsar, a high-yield, rapid-firing laser weapon, as only the Eldar can master. As well as the more common Pulsar, Revenants have also been encountered armed with a Sonic Lance, a short-range sonic weapon using the same technology as the smaller Vibro cannon. Its resonant sonic waves shake its target apart, leaving enemy infantry disorientated. A Revenant's secondary armament is its shoulder-mounted missile launcher, loaded with plasma warheads. These rapid-firing missiles are used at close range for anti-infantry defense. Each Revenant is protected by its hollow fields. Projected by the Titan's fins, the image-distorting field confuses scanners, Auspex and targeters, and, lacking the heavy frontal armor of a Reaver or Warlord, it is the Titan's principal defense against incoming fire. Each Titan is guided by a single crewman, known by the title of Steersman. The pilot merges his consciousness with the spirits within the Titan's Wraithbone core, becoming one with the machine. Incredibly versatile, The Revenant is deployed in a variety of ways. Amongst the Phantom Titans, it can operate in a forward scout role. Its jump jets give it the speed to be deployed in support of armoured aspect assault waves, or it can act as extra heavy firepower to defensive Guardian squads. Revenants of both the MYMERA and Alatok Craftworlds fought in all these roles during the incursion of Batalis III, supporting Eldar attacks with their pulsar fire, often leaping into the front lines or leading an attack, whilst the Phantom Titans provided long-range fire. They made light work of the rough, mountainous terrain on the planet, allowing them to secure advantageous firing positions where no other Titan-sized machine could go. Revenant pulsar fire was also believed to be responsible for damaging the Reaver Titan Invictus Nova and numerous Imperial Guard super heavy tanks that supported it. A noted tactic for the Eldar is to pair their Titans together. Linked telepathically by the blood ties of the steersman, they always fight side by side. Paired Eldar Titans often have joint names. Long and complex by the standards of the Imperium's Titan legions, these war machines bear elaborate titles, which when translated read as Hearts Armoured for Battle, Eagles Born of Flame, Revenge upon Ancient Wrongs, Guardians at the Gates of Infinity, and Protectors of the Fallen, to name but a few. The Phantom Titan. The Phantom is the largest of the Eldar Titans. Tall, slender, and graceful, it is agile and fast when compared to the lumbering, armoured behemoths of the Imperium. Each of these mighty titans is the pinnacle of Eldar warcraft, built around a powerful psychic wraithbone core which permits the spirits contained within to flow freely through the titan, helping to guide the machine and its steersman pilot. The steersman is an experienced master of his art. He controls the titan from its cockpit, towering 25 meters above the battlefield. Locked in a deep trance-like state, his spirit merges with those of the wraithbone to create one sentience, which in turn guides the Titan, almost allowing it to think, react, and maneuver with the speed of an aspect warrior. As with the Revenant, the Phantom's large rear fins project its surrounding hollow field. The Phantom carries some of the Eldar's largest and deadliest weaponry. Amongst the Titan Legion, Princeps, and Moderate, it is rightly feared for its huge pulsars. These are laser energy weapons of massive power, capable of piercing the thickest armor with ease. With long range and its high rate of fire, the massive pulsar is a weapon that has become synonymous with the Phantom and is far superior to anything the Adeptus Mechanicus has sanctioned for use on its own Titans. No less deadly is the Phantom's distortion cannon, a larger version of the weapon carried by the Cobra Super Heavy tank. It tears a huge black seething rift in reality, allowing warp energies to flood into, through, and around the target, tearing it apart. The final Phantom weapon is the less common Power Glaive, known as the Ashuna Valkyla. Approximate translation, the Sleepless Harbinger of Destruction. It is a bladed Titan close combat weapon that also mounts 2 star cannons. As well as its primary arm weapons, the Phantom has secondary weapons high up on its shoulder mounts, which can include a star cannon and the multiple plasma warhead missile launcher for close, anti-personal and anti-aircraft defense. War machines of such size and power as the Phantom Titan are not deployed by the Eldar race's usual raids and surgical strikes. These massive war machines are reserved for the heaviest fighting, when a Craftworld must engage in a pitched battle, when fast hit-and-run raiding will not suffice, and the Eldar wish to wreak terrible destruction upon their enemies. Only then do the webway portals open wide and allow the Phantoms to stride forth. Times must be desperate indeed for the Seer Council to decree the deployment of such gods of war. A rarely encountered variant of the Phantom is known as the Warlock Titan. It contains the spirits of mighty Eldar Seers and Warlocks, still held within its wraithbone core. These spirits of the dead are not powerless, and they can still merge their psychic strength, creating a potent war engine that combines the firepower and grace of the Phantom with the innate abilities of these leaders of the Eldar race to create the pinnacle of psychic engineering. Chapter 1. Ghosts in the Shadows. The countless wars fought in the name of the God Emperor and the galaxy-spanning Imperium of mankind rarely begin with the deafening roar of a massed Imperial Guard artillery barrage, or the earth-shaking footfalls of world-striding titans. Most are simply heralded by the sound of a single shot, or a desperate cry for help in the darkness of an uncaring galaxy. The war for Batalis Free began with silence. Located deep within the glacial fields of Batalis Free's eastern continent, Relay Station NX-8704 formed part of the global surveillance network that kept permanent watch over the ice world's vast, uninhabitable wastelands. That it had functioned without issue for centuries in such harsh conditions was a testament to the consummate skill of the Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests who had seeded the planet with scores of such installations during its transformation into an imperial mining colony. On the eve of its 405th year of perfect operation, the relay station abruptly ceased transmitting. The Elogius Adept, monitoring the relay station thousands of kilometers away at the planet's spaceport, Port Raya, instantly went into cerebral shock and let out a soul-piercing scream, the sudden loss of data collapsing its higher brain functions, which had been exclusively devoted to processing NX-8704's constant stream of text scripts and binary ciphers its entire life. Its death scream sent a shockwave through the living, breathing bioprocessor it was physically and mentally connected to, rendering 5 other adepts catatonic and leaving vast tracts of the planet's easternmost continent unmonitored until repairs could be effected and the damaged biocomponents replaced. On a world where temperatures have been sub-zero for millennia and lethal ice storms whipped up with little warning, the malfunction of NX-8704 was initially blamed on local conditions, and it was left to the transmechanics specialists of the Adeptus Mechanicus on site to resolve the issue and revive the relay station's machine spirit. It was only when a sentinel patrol from a nearby garrison was ordered to investigate the still silent facility 2 days later that the isolated relay station was found to have been attacked and destroyed. The frozen bodies of its massacred transmechanics were laying scattered throughout the station's charred remains, their horrific injuries consistent with those caused by monofilament projectile weapons. A report of the patrol's grisly discovery was immediately dispatched to Port Raya, and as alarms blared throughout the facility, the planet's defense force steeled themselves for further attacks. Over the weeks that followed, the Iceworld's global surveillance network was targeted by more raids, each facility being attacked under the cover of darkness and with little, if any, warning. The motive for the attacks completely eluded Batalis Free's planetary governor, Jamuel Escobar, and the representatives of the noble mining families who oversaw production on the Iceworld. The planet was of little strategic importance, and of only minor economic worth to the subsector. Aside from the 62 million citizen workers and their families living in settlements clustered around the planet's ore mines and refineries, and the 15,000 administratum support staff based at Port Raya, the planet was a desolate wasteland devoid of life. One of only 2 planets fit for habitation in the system, it was a stark contrast to the neighbouring industrial world of Batalis 4. Even the aristocratic families granted mining charters on Batalis 3 generations before by the administratum rarely visited their distant domain. Instead, their will was imposed by hundreds of petty bureaucrats, prefects and stewards charged with meeting the planet's annual administratum tithes and ensuring that every last bit of profit possible after that was ground from the planet's bedrock and the unfortunate souls who lived upon it. The escalating raids were quickly attributed to the Eldar corsairs that the system's Imperial Navy fleet had previously encountered in the Batalis system's outer asteroid belt and the Carina Nebula beyond it. The corsairs, identified as being aligned to the Void Dragon's cadre, had posed a serious threat in the past to the colonists of Batalis 3, launching attacks upon isolated communities whenever the opportunity had presented itself. Regular patrols by the system's fleet had kept them in check in recent years, but it was now obvious from the increasing sightings reported by crews of cargo transports travelling to and from the system that those circumstances had changed. Meanwhile, on Batalis 3, as the profile of the raids on the Iceworld differed little from the Corsairs' modus operandi, Planetary Governor Escobar dispatched his forces as he had done previously. Now, though, these were joined by men from the Cadian 6th Armoured Regiment, elements of which had been recently transferred to the planet to undergo hostile environment training. With their skills and experience, Planetary Governor Escobar desperately hoped that maybe the fighting men of Cadia would put an end to this persistent problem once and for all. Even with the aid of the vastly more experienced Cadian squads, hunting down the raiders was not as simple a matter as Planetary Governor Escobar thought. As soon as a report of a raid was received, the guardsmen were immediately dispatched in squadrons of Arvus lighters across the frozen landscape. Of the raiding party, though, there would be no sign, only the destruction it had wrought upon yet another relay station or isolated outpost, an indication of its passing. On the rare occasion that there were survivors, they rarely provided intelligence of any use. Those that lived long enough to speak of their ordeal were terrified beyond rational sense, babbling incoherently about lights in the darkness before mercifully succumbing to their wounds. The horrific game of cat and mouse was to go on for weeks, the planet's overseers and stewards voicing their concerns ever louder with each attack, fearful that the situation would soon hamper their ability to meet the mining cartel's administratum obligations. And so it might have continued, had not greater military minds been watching events unfold on Batalis Free from afar. The return of a warrior, 032894 M41. A month after the attack on relay station NX8704, a shuttlecraft set down on the primary landing strip at Port Raya. On board was General Mindorus Odon, commander of the 6th Cadian Armoured Regiment and a decorated veteran of over 30 campaigns fought in the name of the Emperor. Recovering from injuries he'd received whilst commanding the regiment in its successful defence of the agri-world Saras 7, the general had abruptly cut short his rehabilitation, giving only 2 hours' notice of his impending arrival to the now nervously waiting Planetary Governor Escobar. Striding past the fawning diplomats from the mining cartels that had hastily gathered to greet him, the general's first action was to reassume command of all divisions of the Cadian 6th garrisoned on the planet. Bowing to the general's superior military expertise, some might suggest almost too eagerly, Planetary Governor Escobar put the planet's defense forces at the Imperial Guard commander's disposal. Only a few hours behind the general's ship, but already filling long-range pick screens at Port Raya, was an armada of vessels, on board which was the remainder of the Cadian 6th Armoured Regiment. Their headquarters had been temporarily based on the system's primary planet, Batalis 4, and the general had issued orders whilst en route that they were to redeploy to Batalis 3. His assessment of the situation was that events unfolding on the planet were serious enough to warrant their immediate relocation. General Odin's long years of tactical training and battlefield experience had led him to conclude that the seemingly indiscriminate attacks were neither random nor the actions of opportunists, taking advantage of what the general saw as a woefully poorly defended system, an abomination he would be taking up with the commanders of its Imperial Navy fleet forthwith. Each attack had been planned by minds infinitely greater than those they had been toying with, and were undoubtedly, in his opinion, part of a much wider initiative. Although none of the facilities attacked were directly connected, by plotting the raids and then projecting where the next one would most likely occur, General Odin had realized that a tipping point would soon be reached, where Batalis 3's entire global surveillance network would be rendered inoperative, with the removal of just 4 more relay stations thousands of kilometers apart from each other. With the planet unmonitored, and the units from the 6th Cadian Armoured and Planetary Defence Force spread too thin across its surface chasing ghosts, the world would be utterly unprepared for the much larger invasion General Odin believed the attacks were a prelude to. Batalis 3's custodians had been foolishly dancing to someone else's tune, and General Odin had arrived to put a stop to it. Knowing that time was a precious commodity he could now ill afford to waste, and with not enough men or armament to protect the entire planet, General Odin ordered that all Imperial Guard and Planetary Defence Forces be recalled from the less populated southern and western continents with immediate effect. This raised a heated storm of protests from the cartel's representatives, who feared what would happen if they lost the total control they currently exerted over the belligerent population, still bitter over what they saw as the twisted promises made to their ancestors centuries before. If the workers were not kept in check, it was feared that riots would soon break out, affecting production rates and preventing the cartels from meeting the planet's stringent administratum tithe. But during times of war, rarely did the priorities of common men, their imperial overseers, and the might of the military concur. And whilst the cartels petitioned furiously for him to rescind his order, the general had far greater concerns. He believed that they would all soon face far worse than a barely restrained militant population, or the administratum's vast chapters of auditors and bureaucrats. General Odin suspected that whatever was behind the raids was already massing its forces in the unmonitored glacial wastelands, and should they gain a foothold on Betalis Free, then the infinitely more valuable industrial world and staging point of Betalis 4 would be their next target. Betalis Free was nothing more than a stepping stone, in his eyes, to the indispensable strategic gem that hung in its heavens. The die is cast. 040894M41. The decision to recall the Imperial Guard squads from the southern and western continents achieved far more than a storm of protest from the planet's prefects. It also provoked the enemy into action, something General Odin had been counting on. As the last guardsman was shuttled back to Port Raya, a cargo vessel flying supplies between the mining facilities on the southern ice plains of the continent was attacked and destroyed. Before this ship disappeared from Port Raya's screens, the pilot relayed back a single picked image of his pursuers. It showed two sleek craft, clearly of Eldar origin, each with their weapons illuminated with an unearthly glow as they powered up to blast the cargo ship from the skies. The message from the planet's assailants was loud and clear. The war for Betalis Free had begun. Even with thousands of Imperial Guard regiments in a constant state of readiness, the wheels of bureaucracy within the Departamento Munitorum grind woefully slowly. The order for the hammer of the Emperor to strike may not be issued for weeks, months, or even years, once a request for aid is first received, as it makes its way through the seemingly endless chain of command. Those seeking assistance are therefore wise to look to their own defense, in case they do not receive reinforcements in time or at all. Therefore, invoking his full powers as Consul Militant of the Betalis system, a position granted to him upon his return to active service, General Odin first issued a system-wide decree that all resources, both military and otherwise, were now part of the building war effort. Attached to this decree was notice that anyone who dared to object would be swiftly transferred to the ranks of the Arbites Penal Battalion, charged as traitors for supporting the Eldar cause. As the superior military force on the planet, the Cadian 6th Armoured would form the core of the army, but what the regiment delivered in terms of experience and ability it lacked in equipment. It was sorely in need of tanks, and had only half of its usual complement available. The remainder had not been replaced after they were destroyed in the war against the Orks on Saras 7. The Cadian 6th Armoured officers first scoured Betalis Free for anything with tracks and armour they could use. All of Betalis Free's heavy armour, what little there was of it, was immediately stripped from the Planetary Defence Force and added to that of the Cadian Regiment, along with its squadrons of Malcador Infernus flamer tanks and Crassus armoured assault transports. General Odin's next action was to gain consensus from the system's Imperial Navy commander that all non-essential flights be grounded on the planet to protect what little air support he would have to call upon during the conflict. The Imperial Navy's small defensive air fleet comprised little more than a squadron of Marauder destroyers and another of Thunderbolts, with the majority of its civilian craft being Arvus cargo shuttles and bulk transports. General Odin knew that the Eldar would first and foremost seek superiority in the skies before committing any ground troops. With little to match their craft in terms of speed or manoeuvrability, this would be a hard battle for the Betalis system fleet, but one it would participate in regardless. Then the General's staff turned their attention to the colonists of the Ice World. The planetary governor had been in the process of building up and training recruits to meet the planet's Departamento Munitorum manpower tithes. The recruits, men and women mostly drawn from the Planetary Defence Force and the Workers' Militia, had been given the temporary title of the 28th Batalis Rifles. They had virtually no equipment or heavy weapons, but had already undergone training with the Cadian 6th and were considered battle-ready. General Odin gave the order for their reassignment. These new, raw recruits had little experience, but he needed the manpower. If nothing else, they would free up more experienced guardsmen from garrison and security duties. Their commander, Colonel Eptida, was a capable and loyal officer who had achieved good results in training the conscripts, and General Odin saw no need to replace him. The search for more troops also led directly to the cells of the Adeptus Arbites. The life of the common man of the Imperium is rarely an easy one. War and disease take all too many from the Emperor's light too soon, and those who survive will likely endure such hardships that each day is a constant struggle, with little reward or comfort, other than what they can take, whether willingly or otherwise, from one another. On Batalis 3, the descendants of the original colonists survived their grim existence with their ancestors' bitter hatred for their overseers bred deep into their psyche. With absolute control over their lives, the cartel's enforcers made sure there was little time between work shifts for them to dwell upon their discontentment. Still though, tempers regularly ran high, and even minor scuffles or disagreements frequently escalated into riots among the general populace, and the swift, harsh penalties dealt out for even the smallest infraction meant there was rarely a cell empty in the many Arbites compounds on the world. It was to these the general's staff turned next, and each prisoner, regardless of his crime or sentence, was armed and given the chance to redeem himself. The final addition to the burgeoning defense force was the primary mining cartel family's personal guard. The absent cartel family's representatives on the planet, Lord Steward Vlar, was a practical man who recognized that the sooner the Eldar threat was removed from Batalis 3, the quicker normal operations would resume. The cartel's personal guard consisted of 1,000 troops, granted for ceremonial duties and protection should the members of the noble mining family who own the Administratum mandate ever visit. The guard looked smart on the parade ground and had their own squadrons of Leman Russ and Chimera, but like the Batalis 28th, they had never seen any combat action. The general's staff took them anyway. In return, Lord Steward Vlar lobbied for, and to the surprise of many of the rival cartel family's representatives, was given the rank of colonel. Having exhausted what Batalis 3 could offer, the general's staff then turned to other sources of manpower. Neighbouring Batalis 4, also now on high alert, was currently the staging point of the Vaust 14th Armoured Regiment. The Vaustian commander was ordered to turn control of the regiment over to the Cadians. Theirs was the senior force, and the needs of the Batalis system overrode his previous orders. The regiment comprised men conscripted from Vaust's hive gangs and workers, and although they lacked the Cadians' tradition of service and sacrifice, the regiment was well equipped with Chimeras and Leman Russ. It also had a heavy tank company of aging but fully functional Macarius battle tanks. These would be essential, especially as the Cadians had little in the way of truly heavy armament, just a few surviving battle-worn squadrons of Baneblades, Stormblades and Shadow Swords. A flotilla of vessels, used by the mining cartels, had already been prepared for the regiment's immediate transfer when its young colonel, in command of the regiment through nothing but sheer fluke of birthright, sent his response. Although he sympathized with the predicament that General Odin faced, he would not deviate from his original orders until Sector Command sent new instructions. The Vaust 14th would stay on Batalis 4. A skirmish on some backwater planet was not part of the Vaustian colonel's current concerns. The Intervention 048894 M41. The defiance of the Vaust 14th's commander ended with the arrival of Inquisitor Lord Hestafus Dansk at Port Raya. The Inquisitor Lord, an agent of the great institution of the Ordo Xenos, swept into General Odin's command room unannounced and unchallenged. Accompanying the Inquisitor Lord was his retinue, 3 Cadian guardsmen, an Adeptus Mechanicus tech priest upon whose arm perched a huge black bird, cables from the implants upon its skull linking it with its creature, and 2 Ogrons. Dragged unceremoniously between the 2 megalithic thugs was the pitiful sight of the young Vaustian colonel, all evidence of his former rank ripped unceremoniously from his soiled uniform. Ordered by his superiors to investigate the growing reports of Eldar in the system, Inquisitor Lord Dansk had been en route to Betalis Free when he had intercepted the young colonel's complaints to his commanders regarding General Odin's orders. Diverting to Betalis 4, Dansk had arrested the colonel and his entire command staff, and sentenced them to serve in the newly formed Arbites Penal Battalion until the end of the war. The Faust 14th Armoured Regiment was immediately redeployed to Betalis Free, and within days their Leman-Russ, Chimeras, Macarius and Ogrin Auxilia Company were reassigned to reinforce the Cadian squads. Some of the Cadian 6th Regiment's officers were also distributed throughout the new regiment's ranks, replacing the inexperienced officers drawn from the Hive World's ruling families with much more experienced Cadian sergeants and veterans. Commissars were also posted among the platoons to quash any dissents with their customary finality. As well as providing a solution to the army's lack of ground troops, the Inquisitor Lord had also called upon other resources, some even the new Consul Militant did not have access to. Also, in the vicinity of the Betalis system was a convoy destined for the Urant system, containing a Titan transport of the Legio Griffanicus, the War Griffins. General Odin forwarded an astropathic request to the War Griffins' homeworld, requesting its temporary reassignment. The request was approved, and, in addition, a strike force of Elysian drop troops accompanying the convoy was also diverted. The Elysians, under the command of a Captain Isatar, would provide their own airborne transports and form a mobile reserve for the defense force. En route to the system, Inquisitor Lord Dansk had also petitioned the Space Wolves chapter for aid. There had been reports of their presence in a neighbouring system, and if the Space Marines heeded the call for reinforcements, then their added might would see a formidable force assembled for the defence of the planet. With all available options exhausted, and the Eldar Corsairs now openly mounting daylight raids on the other two continents, their populations left to fend for themselves by the order of the general, the Betalis Free Defence Force was split into 3 battle groups. Colonel Eptida would take command of the first. His battle group was ordered to immediately head to the Bragan Glacier. The glacier loomed over the entrance to the Tarandor Peninsula, and if it were to fall into enemy hands, then movement on and off the peninsula, where the Imperium's forces were based, would be severely restricted. It was essential that it was in Imperial hands before the war began. Meanwhile, the 2 other battle groups would remain on alert at Port Raya. Only when the full scale of the enemy's forces and its intentions were absolutely clear would the largest battle group, led by General Odin, deploy. The last of the 3 battle groups, commanded by Colonel Vlar, would remain at the spaceport unless the deployment of its reserve forces was deemed absolutely necessary. Until that time, the defenders of the ice world of Betalis Free prepared for war. Chapter 2. The Silence Ends. The colossal blue star of the Betalis system was an ancient traveller. It had passed across the western spiral arms of the galaxy for billions of years, trailed by a ghostly shroud, and had figured in the myths and legends of the region in many guises. To the worlds of the Pashek Consortium, it was the all-seeing eye of a terrifying cyclopean god that constantly watched and judged their every move. But to the Bad Moon Orc warlord, Gobteeth Fangmore, it had been a huge, sparkling jewel dropped by the Orc god Gork, or possibly Mork, himself. Driven by his insatiable greed to possess the star-sized gem, the Orc warlord had swept across the sector at the head of a gargantuan war, millions of orcs strong. His murderous rampage only being halted when he was slain by a rival Goth Orc warlord. To the Imperium, the Betalis star was none of these things. What they found instead, when their survey ships examined and categorized it, was just another seething ball of plasma and radiation like so many others within the Emperor's domain. The star was nothing more than a minor sun that had been spewing its stellar matter out into the void of space for millennia, before it converged together again in a vast cloud of stardust nearly a light-year away. Known as the Carina Nebula, the Betalis Dust Cloud, or simply EPN 31953 by Imperial xenocartographers, To the Eldar, the hazy expanse was the Maiden's Veil, nothing more than an insignificant smudge on the star charts of the Imperial Navy. To the fathomless minds of the Eldar, it was a place avoided by those few who lived upon the Craftworlds, who were privy to its terrible secret. But for the young Eldar, who sought a life free of the restrictions and constraints of the Eldar star palaces, it held no such fear. Instead, for millennia, it drew them like moths to a flame, to join other such outcasts of their slowly dying race within its gossamer veil. And where now a massive Corsair fleet was massing in preparation for its assault upon the Batalis system. The destruction of Batalis III's global surveillance network by the Eldar Corsairs put General Odin's forces at a severe disadvantage. Without it, vast stretches of the eastern continent could not be monitored, nor could they rely on assistance from the orbital Navy defense platforms. The platform sensors had been designed to penetrate the highly reflective stellar matter that poured through the system from the Batalis sun. It would require many days of delicate recalibration by tech adepts before they could be refocused on the planet, let alone provide images of sufficient quality for the battle group's commanders to use. Again, Inquisitor Lord Dansk provided the solution. Amongst his retinue was an Adeptus Mechanicus tech priest, Mydeus, whom the Inquisitor Lord had rescued over 30 years before from a chaos cultist uprising on the hive world of Hemisphere. With the relay stations and power systems of the surveillance network damaged too far, beyond even the tech priest's ability to repair by the Eldar raids, he set to work on an alternative. Working without rest for 2 days and nights, the tech priest put the now redundant monitoring system at Port Raya to a new purpose. From its biomechanical components, he created scores of surveillance servitors, mostly static devices, but some even capable of low-level flight. These were then distributed to key locations across the eastern continent by the Inquisitor's retinue, the Free Cadians and Tech Priest, facing the very real risk of discovery at any moment by the increasing patrols mounted by Eldar jet bike squadrons. Within hours of the last device being activated, the full scale of the Eldar incursion was realized. Monitoring the feeds from the servitors on the banks of pick screens in his command Chimera, Inquisitor Lord Dansk informed General Odin that the defenders of Batalis III faced not one but two massive Eldar battle hosts. The early warning systems on the Watchful Savior, Batalis III's primary orbiting defense platform, burst into life as the Corsair Armada crossed into the system's outer reaches. As one, the dour-robed figures of its choir rose up from their ornately carved wooden stalls and began to chant the canticle of the observant sun, the low droning call to arms, a somber contrast to the shrieking sirens that had also been triggered by the approach of the enemy ships. Far above them, in the Watchful Saviour's towering spires, its gun crews prepared for battle. Scores of Imperial Navy indentured workers heave the platform's massive macro cannons and lance weapons forward into their firing positions. The bundles of chains they hauled them along with cutting deep into their hands and shoulders as they strained with the mammoth effort required of their task. Many levels below, deep in the core of the platform, Adeptus Mechanicus adepts blessed the workings of the station's plasma generator. The long black filaments of their electro brushes smearing holy oils and unguents thickly upon its age-stained cogs and arcane gears. Then, only when they were satisfied they had bestowed upon them sufficient blessings and ointments, did the worshippers of the Omnisire each take hold of one of the generator's primary valves and, with a softly whispered prayer, awaken the dormant machine spirit within. 2 hours after its sensors had detected the approaching Corsair ships, the gun crews of the Watchful Savior opened fire at maximum range, their blinding beams of light slicing deep into the flight paths of the oncoming fleet. Their efforts went unrewarded, though, as the beams harmlessly dissipated beyond the swarming ships. Again and again the crews fired, but to little effect, the defense lasers glowing red-hot as their crews labored to track and hit the elusive targets, whose hollow fields redirected and dispersed the shots with ease. Then, from behind the second moon of the ice world, the system's Imperial Navy fleet joined the battle. Dozens of Fury interceptors, defense monitors and system ships, their numbers pitifully few in comparison to the massed Eldar craft. The Fury interceptors accelerated once they were clear of the moon, The fastest in the small fleet, their orders were to lure the Eldar of their current course and onto the guns of the slower but better armed and armoured system ships. In response, the first wave of Corsairs immediately engaged them. Twisting and spiralling through space, the Eldar craft flew directly at the oncoming formation. Paying scant regard to the barrage of las cannon shots and missiles the Imperium's interceptors fired as they closed the range. Then, each turning their sleek vessels through near impossible angles, they arced back around upon the flanks of their prey. The Xenos pilots obliterating most of the Imperial Navy's squadrons in a synchronous attack that was as perfect in its coordinated execution as it was deadly. With the first wave devoted to destroying the remnants of the Fury squadrons, the second Corsair wave of Dark Stars and squadrons of Aconite and Hellbore frigates advanced to engage the Imperium system ships and defense monitor formations. The long, elegant Xenos escort ships studded with pulsar lances and torpedo launchers. The Holy Retribution, one of the few system ships assigned to the Batalis fleet, was the first to suffer their attentions. Weapons battery after weapons battery was fired by the Holy Retribution's gun crews, and ratings and indentured workers inside the ship, preparing the next volley the instant their weapons were discharged. Then, as the ship's trajectory curved past the moon, the long-range lance fire of the watchful Saviour joined its salvos. Caught within the firestorm, dozens of Corsair craft were laid to waste, their blasted remains soon drifting amongst those of the Fury interceptors that had been destroyed minutes before. For almost an hour the battle raged. First, the Corsairs edged ever closer towards the ship, and in return would be caught in its intense gunfire or trapped within the lancing beams of the watchful Saviour. But as time wore on, Eldar weapons fire took its toll upon the Holy Retribution. With insufficient Fury squadrons to protect it, the agile and powerful Eldar Darkstar fighters inflicted enough damage to overload its shield generators and dove in to strafe its gun decks and command spire the moment they failed. With external bulkheads compromised and the fractured, meter-thick panels of armor glass surrounding the command deck threatening to breach at any moment, the Holy Retribution's commander, Flag Captain Mouvain, gave the order for his dying vessel to be turned towards the one area of the system's outer reaches that all Imperial vessels had so far given a wide berth. Entering the region with the Corsairs still strafing his vessel, Flag Captain Mouvain opened up the ship's Vox network and started to recite the common prayer of the fleet. The sound of the centuries-old ship tearing apart, clearly audible around him. The venerable Flag Captain had not gotten far through the somber liturgy when the Eldar Darkstar fighter, its alien identity not recognized by the remnants of the minefield seeded in the Batalis system centuries before by the divine unification, triggered one of the abandoned mines. As the power generation crystals on the Eldar craft shattered and its hull fragmented, its debris field set off further mines, critically damaging the Holy Retribution and scores of other Corsair vessels that had swarmed around the dying ship. The explosions tore through the Holy Retribution, causing its shields to fail and its bulkheads to be ripped apart, sending thousands of Imperial Navy crewmen into the cold vacuum of space. In the few areas of the vast ship where the crew were not immediately ejected into the void, the men fought amongst themselves for places in the few undamaged salvation pods. Those fortunate to escape were either immediately targeted and destroyed by Eldar Corsair vessels, or slowly drifted through the system until they reached the safety of one of the inhabited planets. Whilst the destruction of the Holy Retribution played out across the edge of the Batalis system, the rest of the Corsair fleet maintained their course towards the watchful Saviour and the last few remaining Fury squadrons and system ships that now stood guard over it. Virtually unopposed, the first wave of Dark Stars scored multiple direct hits, their shots punching through its shields and critically damaging the platform's gravetics stabilizers. With a sickening motion, the massive platform began to list, and anything not securely fixed down began to roll and slide across the decks, crushing all in its way as the watchful Saviour tilted and began to drift out of its geostationary orbit. The effects were devastating. Gun crews and ratings were drowned as the huge vats of chemicals that hung over the defense lasers their toxic contents used to prevent the weapons from overheating, broke free from their mountings, engulfing the frantically fleeing men in an acidic tidal wave. In the apothecarium, the watchful Saviour's surgeon master was nearly fatally maimed when shelves storing surgical implements tipped over him mid-operation, their razor-sharp blades slicing him from head to toe with scores of incisions. A worse fate, though, was to befall the crews who worked in the bays, permanently exposed to the outer void. As soon as the watchful Saviour had begun to list, the bulkhead doors leading to open sections of the platform automatically sealed shut. With their escape routes cut off, hundreds died when the protective energy field between the crew and space fluctuated for a few seconds, exposing them to the intense radiation of the Batalis system star. Volleys from a third Corsair wave finished off the stricken platform, its return fire slackening as pyres raged within it, and its compartments flooded with toxic smoke. With defeat imminent, and his guns falling silent one by one, Flag Captain Bassas, the watchful Saviour's commander, ordered the platform's evacuation. Salvation pods were frantically loaded with the wounded and the lucky few unscathed survivors, and then ejected towards the planet below. The few Imperial Navy ships that had survived the first assaults retreated into the outer regions of the Batalis star, its radiation shielding them from the sensors of the Corsair fleet that now dominated the Batalis system. Having won the battle for the skies above Batalis free, the Eldar immediately turned their attention to the planet below. The Battle of Alnitak Prime, 055894M41. The first major land offensive of the Batalis Free War took place at Alnitak Prime, a vast facility that refined chemicals used in the production of promethium, and that stretched for over 50 kilometers across and through the Bragan Glacier, flowing down from the Escarta mountain range at the infinitesimal speed of less than half a meter a century. The glacier, its ice marbled with the dark grey ash that constantly fell like snow from the refinery's forest of chimneys and cooling towers, loomed ominously over the eastern edge of the Elysian Plains. The plains were little more than icy wilderness, but across them lay the entrance to the Isthmus of Tarandor, the land bridge that connected the northeastern peninsula and ultimately Port Raya to the rest of the eastern continent. The two Eldar forces, that of Aliatok in the south of the continent and the other from MYMEARA, speeding eastwards from its portal near the western coast, were expected to converge on the Elysian Plains. General Odin was preparing his battle group to oppose them there, and whoever controlled the glacier would hold an advantage in the battle to come. Dispatched in a fast-moving convoy of Leman Russ, Malkador, Praetors and Crassus armoured assault transports, and taking advantage of the road networks that fed the facility's insatiable appetite for Batalis Free's raw materials, Battle Group Emptida deployed on the glacier on the evening of the third day of its departure from Port Raya. As Colonel Emptida watched over the battle group's preparations, already thousands of workers and their families had left their hab blocks behind and set out on the perilous trek to seek shelter elsewhere, heading either for the northern and eastern highway tunnels or the networks of canyons and caves in the surrounding mountains. Each man, woman and child knew the enemy was coming. The only question was when it would arrive. True to form, the Eldar did not keep the defenders waiting long. In the pre-dawn hours of the fourth day, as the battle group's sentinel forward reconnaissance squads patrolled the southernmost regions of the glacier, they came under fire from squadrons of Eldar grav tanks and Viper jet bikes that had flown ahead of the main MYMERA force, skimming low across the Elysian Plains and up over the leading edge of the ice wall. Near invisible in the darkness, they registered as little more than faint smudges on the Sentinel's sensors, as one by one the Walker squadrons were annihilated. Eldar Rangers, already concealed in the surrounding ice canyons, expertly guided their airborne brethren in. Joining the MYMERA craft shortly after, the first wave of Corsair vessels began their attack run on the facility. The battle group was ready and waiting for them though. As the Nightwings, Phoenix and Vampires soared down, they were met with a tremendous firestorm of las shot and artillery shell. Additionally, prior to leaving their base on the neighbouring industrial world, the officers of the Cadian 6th had ordered their men to completely strip its resupply depots of all the guns, ordnance and ammunition they could lay their hands on. Little remained by the time the final Cadian squad left for the Ice World. Each ship in the fleet had been stacked to the gunwales with enough armament to defend the planet for months, and amongst this huge arsenal had been a consignment of defence platforms due to be distributed to wars elsewhere in the sector. Now a large stretch of the glacier bristled with the barrels of those guns as they unleashed salvo upon salvo into the oncoming Eldar attack formation. The thunder of Battle Group MYMERA's heavy weapons shook the surrounding mountain ranges to their core, triggering avalanches and rockfalls that roared down their slopes, burying hundreds of refugees who had gambled that safety lay in the cave systems rather than heading east to risk the long walk across sub-zero tundra. Undeterred by the firestorm they had flown into, the Eldar flyers soared over the facility, and once their attack run was complete, raced upwards into the heavens. With barely enough time to reload, the guardsmen soon spotted scores of white contrails on the horizon, which augured the approach of a second Corsair wave. The guardsmen manning the defence platforms unleashed another booming volley as the enemy came within range. Shell after shell swept the sky as the crews swung their heavy weapons round to follow the flight paths of the sleek, darting ships, before they too rose up above the facility at breakneck speed and out of range. The second attack had lasted no longer than the first, and although both enemy forces had given their all, neither had inflicted a death blow upon the other. As silence descended once more upon Alnitak Prime, the gun crews reloaded and scanned the horizon, waiting for the telltale signs of contrails to appear once again. The next attack came swiftly, although not from the air, but instead from the surrounding mountains as sniper fire ripped through the heavy weapons platforms. The Corsairs had been little more than a diversion, a feint to buy time for the Eldar Rangers to move up so that their guns were within range of the battle group. Those guardsmen who survived the opening volley were immediately pinned down, using what little cover their weapons platforms provided, or lying motionless amongst the bodies of their fallen comrades, as sniper fire ricocheted along the platform's metalwork. Watching the battle at Alnitak Prime, Colonel MYMERA initiated the next part of his plan. On his command, the heavily armoured Leman Russ, Chimera and Praetor armoured assault launcher squadrons waiting there sprang into action, their exhausts belching black, oily fumes into the freezing cold air as they accelerated towards the besieged lines of heavy weapons platforms. With no chance of locating the Eldar hidden amongst the vast network of ravines surrounding them, Colonel MYMERA had turned to one of the few weapons in the Imperial Guard's arsenal he had in abundance: overwhelming firepower. The tank's gunners sent round after round into the mountains, the shells setting off a lethal hailstorm of shrapnel as rocks and ice exploded with deadly effect. As the tanks prowled the battlefield and the sniper fire ceased, the survivors from the Faust 14th and Batalis 28th regiments on the platforms began to celebrate, believing the Eldar had been destroyed. They had done it. They had seen off 2 attacks and lived. The more experienced Cadians amongst them remained grimly silent. They knew the Eldar were not so easily beaten and would soon be back. Something Colonel MYMERA was more than ready to face. And in a few minutes, when the pace of the battle briefly paused, he gave the order for the next part of his plan to commence. Speeding down the glacier from Alnitak Prime came the last of the vehicles MYMERA had at his disposal. As they sped along, their tracks rumbled over the facility's massive air vents that were interspersed along the glacier. Only a day before, these vital lifelines had supplied precious clean air to dilute the toxic fumes that spewed from the furnaces in the facilities below, preventing the suffocation of the thousands who toiled at them day and night. Hastily abandoned by the workers, those furnaces still burned fiercely, and where once men and women had laboured, something else now moved in their place, transported to the glacier within the holds of the Crassus. The 2 waves of Imperial vehicles soon joined together and reformed into 3 huge blocks as they picked up speed, creating a new front line a kilometre down the glacier. Now at the rear, the static heavy weapons platforms then took on the role of artillery. Once more, the Corsair pilots swooped down, and in return, the tank crews opened fire as the heavily armoured blocks rumbled forwards. Shuriken cannon and star cannon traded shots with heavy bolters and autocannons as the graceful craft strafed the battle line. The range was so close between the two sides that hollow fields and armour mattered little. In the furious firefight, the tight Imperial formation and its near constant bombardment evened the odds. Teams of jet bike riders skimmed across the surface of the glacier behind the Corsairs, following up on the attacks of the larger craft. The slow, lumbering Imperial force continued to roll stubbornly forwards, each driver trusting his safety to his armoured vehicle and its guns, and remaining within the formation. Fight together and live, stand alone and die. The choice was simple. However, gaps were starting to appear, and even originally fully loaded ammunition supplies were also running low through the near-constant rate of fire. At Almatak Prime, Colonel Aptida watched on solemnly as the brave guardsmen under his command fought on. Had they been given more time and resources, they might have succeeded, but the young colonel knew such hope for the folly it was. It was clear that the Eldar's air superiority and increasing numbers would have eventually swept away the battle group regardless. His men had done well to last this long. Already, he'd had word from Odon's command staff that the main force of the MYMERA host were deploying onto the Alatian plains. If he didn't act now, then the Eldar would gain the upper ground, and Battle Group Odin wouldn't stand a chance. Whispering a brief prayer for the Emperor's forgiveness, Colonel Emtida turned to the men behind him, who controlled the Cyclops demolition vehicles now positioned through the depths of the facility, and with one word, ended the Battle of Alnatak Prime. Detonate. A prayer for the fallen. Kilometers away from the glacier, Inquisitor Lord Dansk recited the prayer for the fallen as he watched the destruction of Battle Group Emtida and its attackers through the eyes of a hovering servitor. The detonation of the Cyclops demolition vehicles deployed through the facility during the battle had set off a catastrophic chain reaction amongst its furnaces and huge chemical storage vats. The blast that immediately followed liquefied the ice field above it, launching the battle group and billions of tons of melted ice and molten rock straight up into the vast flock of Eldar craft circling above. Battle Group Emtida could never have held the glacier or facility against the arrayed might of the Eldar, and its young colonel had known that as soon as he'd received his orders. But Inquisitor Lord Dansk had respectfully acknowledged that Colonel Emtida had performed his duty without question, and through his selfless sacrifice, none of his men, he had succeeded in denying the Eldar the advantage of the higher ground and brought Battle Group Odin the time it so desperately needed. His somber liturgy complete, Inquisitor Dansk severed his connection with the servitor and looked out with his own eyes upon the impressive sight of the massed ranks of Battle Group Odin, arrayed across the westward entrance to the Tyranids Isthmus below him. May the Emperor protect. Chapter 3. Dark Times. The full might of Battle Group Odin dominated the approach to the Tyranids Isthmus. Tanks, armoured vehicles, heavy artillery and guardsmen stood arrayed on the Alatian plains, ready to meet the Eldar assault head-on. As dense black smoke billowed up from the Bragan Glacier, the wreckage from the explosion there still burning fiercely, reports were received that the host of MYMEARA had swept on to the West Alatian plains and begun its approach. Heralding their arrival, and first to come within range of the massed guns of the Imperial Guard, were their Corsair allies, an armada of Phoenix, Hornets and Nightwings that dived down through the gathering storm clouds at breakneck speed. As at Alnatak, the Imperial Guard met the attack with a barrage of devastating firepower. Chimeras, Praetors, Baneblades, Stormblades, Shadow Swords, Macarius and Leman Russ lending their fury to their heavy artillery onslaught. The Corsair ships soared in, undeterred, their agile pilots weaving and threading their craft through the air, their shuriken cannons and missile launchers returning fire as all around them shells and missiles exploded. First blood went to Batalis Free's defenders as a Void Dragon Nightwing, its swept wing hull, adorned with symbols of its cadre, was ripped from the sky. Its destroyer was a Hydra flak tank, one of the precious few deployed with the battle group. With its systems trained on the horizon, the Hydra's logic spirit had swung the tank's autocannons into action as soon as it had detected movement, tearing through one of the Nightwing's curved wings and sending it spiraling into a terminal dive that not even the superior skills of its Eldar pilot could recover from. The Nightwing's destruction lifted the morale of the guardsmen more than any rousing speech the Ministorum priests could deliver. In that one moment, they were raised up from the depths of despair they had fallen into, seeing the destruction of Battle Group MYMERA. The rate of attrition intensified as more Corsairs came within range of the heavy guns, weapons fire from both sides causing death and unparalleled carnage at such close quarters. Amidst the furious assault, Leman Russ were hit and damaged as the Corsairs found their marks, and in return, the Xenos ships were blasted from the skies, straying too close to the battle group's many guns. Soon, though, even the most battle-thirsty Corsair pilots saw that to continue would ultimately mean their deaths. They broke off, speeding up through the gathering storm clouds and beyond to regroup and tend to their wounds. The opening moves of the battle had been played out, and the Elation plains were littered with its casualties. With the forces of MYMERA on the plains and reports coming in of the host of Craftworld Eldar now approaching from the south, General Odin gave the order for the battle group to separate into two companies. It was a bold move, and one those Imperial Guard commanders who religiously followed the doctrines of the Tactica Imperialis would have considered foolhardy and reckless. However, as each Eldar Craftworld's force outnumbered the battle group many times over, if it remained a single block, it would be quickly overwhelmed and destroyed. The first company, Vengeance, comprised the tank squadrons, Leman Russ, Hydras and Chimeras. The second company, designated Retribution, was mainly infantry, deployed in Crassus armoured assault transports, with what little General Odin could spare in terms of Leman Russ and Praetors, acting as escort. Company Vengeance had orders to head west. It was to lure in as many Eldar craft as it could and take the inevitable first hit. That would give Company Retribution the chance to intercept the approaching Alatok land forces in the south. Joining Retribution and Vengeance on the Elation plains would be the Titans of Legio Gryphanicus, 4 Reavers and 4 Warhounds, which had just reached the war zone from Port Raya. The original plan had been for the Legio Gryphanicus Titans to lend their much-needed support to Vengeance's tank squadrons. Now they had a different objective. The surveillance network set up by Inquisitor Lord Danx's retinue around the eastern continent had relayed back images of at least 8 Eldar Titans emerging from the MYMERA portal. Amongst them, and now somewhere on the northern edge of the Elation plains, were 2 massive Eldar Phantom Titans, and the Princeps of the colossal war machines of the Imperium had orders to destroy them. Deployed directly in the path of the MYMERA host, Company Vengeance, with General Odin leading from the fore, clashed with the Eldar force as the last rays of the system's cold blue sun were smothered by snow clouds pouring in from the north. Skimming ahead of MYMERA's infantry was a vast armada, hundreds of squadrons of jet bikes, hornets and vipers. In stark contrast to their Corsair brethren, MYMERA's pilots demonstrated no desire to dive down upon their Imperial foe and satisfy a barely checked thirst for battle. Instead, they came in low, in tight surgical formations, forcing the rear ranks of Vengeance to hold fast their fire, lest their shells impact among their own front lines. The change in tactics served the Eldar well. The wake of that devastating first sortie was strewn with the hulls of over 70 Leman Russ and Chimera, their thick armor plating scorched by shuriken fire, or the crew killed as pulse laser and prism cannon fire penetrated the tank's armor. But such losses were expected. Against the more chaotic attacks of the Corsair pilots, standard tank tactics had sufficed. But to maintain such tight formation when faced with the main body of the Eldar assault would have proved suicidal. Their more disciplined pilots would simply have stayed out of range of Vengeance's guns and attack from afar. Once the battle was underway, Vengeance's numbers would be too few to repeat the maneuver. Instead, they would engage the aircraft in smaller groups, the experienced tank crews of the Cadian 6th, fighting the battle on their own terms. The plan worked, but not as effectively as Odin had bargained for. Having recently fought the Ork Horde on Saras 7, a force that barely kept in check at the best of times by its Blood Axe warlord, The Cadian officers reverted to the tactics which had worked there. These had to be quickly countermanded and replaced with more effective maneuvers to use against disciplined Eldar. As if the attack from the air wasn't enough for the Imperial forces to contend with, the first of the Eldar land forces arrived. Deploying swiftly from the MYMERA portal far off in the west, squadrons of wasps, the Eldar race's long-legged assault walkers, launched themselves into the heart of the battle. Their pilots, using a combination of the wasps' speed and the maneuverability afforded by their jump jets, to land amongst Company Vengeance's squadrons. The tactics soon found some of the less experienced sponson gunners from the Vost 14th blasting away at tanks from their own side as they became fixated on the targets in their sights, oblivious to anything else. Then, as the jet bikes, Hornets and Vipers came round again for a second attack run, the Eldar Wasps would propel themselves swiftly out of range as the Eldar craft cut yet another swathe of destruction through Vengeance's lines, adding to the steadily growing number of burning tanks littering the battlefield. With the benefit of General Odin's years of experience, though, the Imperial Guard force was nothing if not adaptable. The veteran tank commander ordered the Cadian crews to split up their squadrons. One tank from each was to separate off, presenting itself as the vulnerable target the Eldar pilots were prowling the battlefield for. Once it had secured their attentions, it was to speed off as fast as it could, luring the Xenos flyers straight into the waiting guns of the rest of its squadron. It was not a precise or reliable tactic, but when it did work, it was devastatingly effective. Out on the ice plains, the Reavers and Warhound Titans of the Legio Graphanicus were closing upon Sector 453, where the last sighting of the Eldar Phantom Titans had been reported. To search the vast wasteland more effectively, they had split into two. The first group, the Demi-Maniple Invictus, was moving across the north of the Elatian Plains, a single Reaver Battle Titan flanked by a pair of Warhounds. The largest of the two, the Exero-Maniple, was sweeping up from the south and comprised 3 Reaver Titans and a pair of Warhounds. Both groups were shadowed by the heavy armour of Battle Group Odin, the few squadrons of Baneblades, Shadow Swords and Stormblades that the Cadian 6th Regiment command staff could secure in the short time they'd had to assemble the army. As the Eldar Wasp squadrons launched their assault on Vengeance, the Reaver Battle Titan Invictus Nova and the Warhound Titan Tempus Prima and Magna Canis strode out onto the frozen landscape of the northern Elysian Plains, the footfalls of the mechanical behemoths sinking meters deep into the permafrost as they searched for their foe. Without warning, 5 pulsar blasts slammed into the right flank of the Magna Canis from the mountains that edge the north of the Elysian Plains. The Warhound Titan staggered under the assault, waves of actinic energy flickering and sparking across its overloading void shields. With a command born of instinct rather than conscious thought, the Princeps of the Nova and Tempus instantly returned fire. With their target hidden from sight, both saturated the mountainous borderland with lancing plasma bolts, setting off avalanches that roared down the mountain ranges. The Magna Canis, damaged but still functioning, quickly recovered and added its own awesome might to the bombardment. Its plasma blast gun had been disabled in the attack, and so the Canis Princeps ordered his Moderati to switch to its turbo laser. An explosion from the super heavy vehicle squadron buffeted the Demi-Maniple. A Shadow Sword had flipped over, smoke and flames pouring out of its ruptured hull. Not waiting to suffer the same fate, the rest of its squadron split apart as another fusillade flashed between them, knocking out the tracks of one super heavy and barely missing another. With inhuman speed, the machine spirit of the Invictus Nova calculated the fusillade's origin point and located their attacker, although the Eldar giant was barely visible, so effective were its hollow fields. It was one of the Eldar Phantom Titans, and before the Demi-Maniple had time to react, it unleashed another savage volley, the energy bolts from its pulsar stitching along the ice only meters behind another swerving Baneblade. In thunderous concert, the 3 Titans of the Legio Graphanicus opened fire, but only the Nova's 5 Apocalypse missiles had the range to reach their mark, and they slammed into the Eldar Phantom's left shoulder, its hollow field shimmering and flickering as they temporarily failed. Before the Imperium's Titans could follow up with a second barrage, a high-pitched shriek emanated from the mountains behind them. With an almighty scream, the first Eldar Phantom's distortion cannon discharged a seething bolt of black warp energy into the heart of the demi-maniple. It hit the Magna Canis, passing cleanly through its void shields and wreathing its torso in a shroud of impenetrable darkness. The princeps of the other two Titans watched in absolute horror as sections of the massive war machine momentarily vanished into the rift between real space and the Imperium, and then reappeared moments later as nothing more than a twisted mass of darkly glowing metal. Unable to cope with the massive stress placed upon it, the Canis's plasma reactor detonated. The blast shook the northern Elatian plains, its deafening boom heard as far away as the Taurus Delta in the south, where the first guardsmen of Company Retribution were preparing to deploy. Still kilometers south of the battle, the princeps of Titan Group Exaro desperately tried to make contact with the demi-maniple, but their repeated hails met with silence. Too far away to immediately come to their aid, the Exaro maniple could only pray that, when they arrived, the other two Legio Gryphanicus Titans had somehow survived. With no Imperial Navy support to provide air cover and Vengeance's heavy armor already fully engaged to the north, the Guardsmen of Company Retribution faced near impossible odds in their race to engage the Alatok host. But Retribution had two crucial factors in its favor: time and the unforgiving landscape of the Ice World. The Alatok portal was significantly further away from the Elatian plains than that of the MYMERA Craftworlds by thousands of kilometers, and directly in the path of its land forces lay the Taurus Delta. Stretching across the entire southern edge of the Elatian plains, the Taurus Delta was the result of millions of years of water erosion, a massive labyrinth of narrow canyons and gorges, created at the confluence of two rivers that had frozen over a millennia before. For Retribution to stand any chance against the Alatok host, it had to reach the Taurus Delta before the Eldar Craftworld's airborne armada arrested its northern edge. General Odin planned to use Taurus to shield Retribution from the worst that Alatok's pilots could unleash upon it, but this move was not without its consequences. For Vengeance, this almost certainly meant it would soon be fighting on a second front, as Alatok's pilots turned northwards in search of more accessible targets. Company Retribution's headlong charge to reach Taurus unopposed nearly succeeded, but just as the lead vehicles of its transport convoy were less than a kilometer away, the first of Alatok's Hornets, Falcons and Vipers, sleek and deadly craft, emblazoned with its emblems of the Sword of Cain, bisecting a red moon, shot over the northern edge of the delta. The moment they were spotted, the order to accelerate whip-lashed through Retribution's convoy. Unlike an arm attack, there was no time to organize a rolling defense, and all the men of Retribution could do was hold tight and pray for the Emperor's protection. Alatok's shuriken weapons and pulse lasers strafed the Imperial convoy, but to little effect. The heavily plated hulls of the Crassus armored assault transports ably protected the guardsmen inside, with only a few vehicles being damaged by shots hitting their exposed tracks. The guardsmen, though, could not stay within them forever, and when they reached the Delta, their deployment was more of a mad dash for the shelter of its icy canyons than a carefully orchestrated maneuver. As Alatok's pilots banked round again for another aerial attack, the first Imperial Guard squads to reach the Taurus Delta barreled out of their vehicles as fast as they could, quickly followed by thousands more guardsmen following close on their heels. Soon a sea of deserted vehicles began to stretch back across the Elatian plains, until those travelling at the rear of the convoy were forced either to ditch their own transports there and make their way through the labyrinth of abandoned Crassus on foot, or break away and enter it via one of its many other entrances further to the east or west. By the time the last troops had entered the interior of Taurus, the landscape around it was littered with smouldering wreckage and hundreds of dead and wounded guardsmen. In contrast, Alatok's pilots had survived the assault virtually unscathed, and as General Odin predicted, they immediately turned north to add their firepower to that of their MYMERAN brethren. Company Retribution advanced wearily into the Taurus Delta, its squads scattered amongst the tangled pathways, with medium to long-range Vox transmissions absorbed by the high walls of ice and rock. It was impossible to coordinate, let alone locate all the disparate bands of guardsmen dispersed within the Delta's midst, barely having escaped the airborne assault and with no way to contact anyone, not within the line of sight. Their officers followed the last order they had received: locate and destroy the enemy. The Eldar had taken full advantage of their earlier airborne attack to disperse their forces within the Delta. Alatok's Rangers, dropped in by the Eldar Falcons now making their way north towards Company Vengeance, had already advanced into the Ice Labyrinth, tearing through its winding passageways with a natural speed, before agilely scaling sheer-sided ice walls, seeking any advantage they could gain against the oncoming Imperial force. Hidden under their long, flowing chameleon cloaks, scores of Rangers were now positioned throughout the Delta, coordinating Alatok's advance with lethal precision. They had been joined by hundreds of Eldar Corsair troops, who mounted hidden-run attacks upon the Imperial Guard squads as they worked their way further into the Delta. Using the element of surprise to their advantage, the bands of Corsairs stealthily worked their way along the tops of the canyon walls, then either fired directly down into the squads below them, or dropped down and wreaked carnage in their midst. With the Imperium's officers unable to alert each other to the threat of ambush from above, dozens of Retribution squads were completely wiped out by the vicious assaults of the Eldar outcasts. As Alatok's warriors joined in with the battle, the atrocities escalated. The most horrific fighting occurred in the northwest of the canyons. 8 squads of guardsmen moving together were pinned down by sniper fire the moment they entered a large gorge. Firing at them from overhanging cliffs, the Rangers forced the squads to seek what little shelter there was, their accurate shots hitting anyone who dared to break cover to fire at them. Hunkered down, there was little the guardsmen could do but pray that their frantic requests for assistance over the static-filled Voxnet would be answered. What came through did not wear the uniform of the Cadian 6 or any of the other hastily assembled regiments from the system. Instead, one of the most terrifying facets of the Eldar army unleashed itself upon them. The guardsmen watched with disbelieving eyes as tendrils of bright white energy clawed into real space, quickly coalescing into pools of retina-burning light. Before the guardsmen could react, a lethal cloud of monomolecular wire spewed from each portal. The razor-sharp threads scattered through the gorge, effortlessly penetrating any environment suit they came into contact with. Within seconds, the canyon was echoing with hideous screams as the victims of the lethal strands were eviscerated. The only evidence of the carnage wrought within their bodies, a spray of blood splattered across the snow as the filaments retracted. As each of the coruscating warp lights faded, the warp spiders that had manifested within them leapt into action, wielding their power blades in great sweeping arcs, which sliced through torsos, severing limbs and heads from bodies with consummate skill. Then, with their first strike complete, the Aspect Warriors faded back into the warp, the afterglow of their departure dazzling all whose eyes were hypnotically drawn to it, etching their sight with chaotic, leering faces that gazed hungrily at them from the Imperium. The gorge soon became little more than a charnel house, as the massacre was repeated, despite the fierce resistance put up by those guardsmen who had recovered the wit to do so. The warp spiders expertly traversed between real space and warp space until their objective was achieved, then vanished completely. It had taken them less than 3 minutes to kill over 80 guardsmen, and there was no evidence that the Aspect Warriors had suffered any injury in return. With battle joined, the forces of Alatok and Retribution clashed throughout the Tormus Delta, thousands on both sides fighting for their lives within its icy labyrinth. Guardians, having already seeded crossing points between the canyons with heavy weapons platforms, fired at any guardsmen that passed within their sights. The troopers mounted their own ambushes in return, risking the slippery ascent of the canyon walls to stake out the upper pathways. From there, they threw frag grenades down onto the paths of war walkers, who had been restricted to single file in the tighter confines of the Delta. Then, as the Eldar war walkers returned fire, the squads melted away, taking advantage of their lofty positions to leap out of danger and into the adjoining canyons. Death stalked the Tormus Delta, and who would win and who would survive would be determined over the next few murderous hours. Although having lost one of its warhounds in the earlier confrontation, the first Maniple still managed to fight back against the Phantom Titans, severely damaging them, and with the support of the now advancing second Maniple, gave chase to the retreating Phantom Titans. In the west, the battle was quickly turning against vengeance, and a new wave of Eldar craft had been reported appearing from the direction of the MYMEARA portal. All who watched expected this second wave to reinforce MYMERA's attack, but instead they carried on heading west, directly towards the Tyranids Isthmus. The actions of the breakaway Eldar force were a complete mystery to the veteran general, but with Battle Group Odin's infantry and vehicles wholly committed to the Alatian plains, and in the Taurus Delta, there was little he could do to prevent its advance. Chapter 4. The Tide Turns. War waged upon Batalis Free, and in the heavens above it the few remaining Imperial vessels in the Batalis system had retreated to the one place even the Corsairs would not dare venture, the corona of the crystal blue Batalis star. Amongst its gaseous outer regions, the flotilla of Imperial Navy ships was almost invisible to the keen-sighted outcast pilots and their sensors, but there was a high price to pay for the star's protection. Already its radiation was leaching through the outer hulls of the smaller craft, and reports of fatalities were increasing by the hour. The risks of remaining near to the star, though, were far outweighed by those they'd face from what waited for them beyond it. The Corsair fleet of the Void Dragons now roamed the voids between the Batalis system's worlds, unchallenged, easily picking off the few Imperial Navy vessels who had been unable to reach the safety of the star's corona in time. The Eldar stranglehold on the Batalis system, though, was to prove short-lived. The first indication those fighting for survival on Batalis Free had that reinforcements were on their way was when the Corsair armada that had joined in the assault on Company Vengeance turned their vessels skywards and deserted their Craftworld brethren, with billions of men and machines of war at its disposal. All that the galaxy-spanning Imperium of mankind had needed was time, and General Odin's request for reinforcements had been answered in full by the planets and Imperial Navy bases of neighbouring systems. Thousands of the Emperor's Own were en route to relieve the besieged defenders, and at the head of the spear tip were the strike cruisers of the Space Wolves' great company of Bran Redmore. The Space Wolves' battle fleet was first to appear at the system's outer boundaries, and like a ravening pack of wolves, it tore a path straight through the Corsairs, Arcanites, Nightshades and Hemlocks. Without stopping, it continued towards Batalis Free, the Eldar fleet soon realizing why it had not turned to follow up its initial strike. A second wave of Imperial ships had appeared in system, closely behind the Space Marines, and the Corsairs were soon outflanked as the massive Imperial Navy armada rounded on them. The Eldar outcasts at first held the advantage in terms of speed and agility, and wove a deadly path through the squadrons of Imperial fighter craft as they launched. Soon, though, the Void Dragons were faced with overwhelming odds, and for each ship they destroyed, the Corsairs found themselves evading the guns of two more. As well as coming to the aid of the defenders of Batalis Free, Sector Command had determined that its system was to finally be scoured of the Eldar that had plagued it for centuries. As the Imperial Navy engaged with the Void Dragons, Bran Redmore's fleet continued to Batalis Free in a furious blaze of destruction. In all that time, only once did it break its own counsel and contact those fighting on the planet below. The short message was broadcast by its Wolf Lord, Bran Redmore himself, and was sent directly to Inquisitor Lord Danx's command Chimera, the bitter hatred the Space Wolves chapter reserved for the Inquisition still burning from their clash over the massacre at Armageddon centuries before. "We fight for the Allfather, Inquisitor. Do not cross our path." The Space Wolves wasted little time in deploying onto Batalis Free, the skies above the Taurus Delta, where the men of Retribution were fighting a furious defense against Craftworld Eldar forces, were slashed with over a score of fiery contrails as the chapter's drop pods plummeted from the heavens. The claws of Rus digging deep into the ice world as close to 200 Space Wolves made planetfall. The instant the disembarkation ramps unfolded, each drop pod unleashed a deadly cargo, and with fire in their hearts and bolters at the ready, the Space Wolves stormed towards the ice labyrinth. Company Retribution had already begun to re-establish communications even before the Space Wolves drop pods had landed. As the Eldar Rangers and Corsairs had done before them, teams of Vox operators had climbed above the transmission-deadening ice passageways and were now able to relay orders between the scattered forces. Sniper fire from the Eldar Rangers was taking a toll on their number, but enough were able to evade them for Retribution to finally start fighting as one coordinated force. The effects of this were soon felt by the Eldar. Where once the support platforms manned by pairs of Eldar guardians had cut a swathe through the frozen passageways and dominated large sections of the Tormus Delta, Retribution squads now set to work in a two-pronged assault. Moving through adjacent canyons, strike teams would fire mortars over the canyon's walls or fix explosive charges to the thin barriers of ice and rock between them, discharging a lethal hail of shrapnel into the Guardians' positions as squads of guardsmen, waiting just out of harm's way, stormed through the settling dust and eradicated any Eldar who had survived. In the southwest of the Delta, where both sides had seen some of their fiercest encounters, Retribution's officers moved in their most experienced troops. Following a barrage of heavy weapons fire, guided in by Vox teams and guardsmen acting as spotters, veteran Cadian squads stormed the Eldar battle lines en masse. In response to Retribution's new offensive, Alatok Farseers moved in squads of dire avengers, and their lightning-fast assault soon cut into the guardsmen's gains. The men and women of Retribution died in droves, whole squads being cut down by shuriken catapult fire, or upon the blades wielded by expert Eldar swordsmen. This, though, was where the Sons of Rus came into their own. The Space Wolves of Bran Redmore's company charged through the network of canyons and gorges, obliterating any resistance they met. Packs of grey hunters prowled the maze, and the canyons echoed with the shriek and roar of shuriken fire and bolter rounds as they unleashed their wrath upon the Eldar. Then, bloodied, their ceramite armour scored in numerous places, they would emerge triumphant and move on implacably to their next objective. Of all the bloody conflicts the Space Wolves were involved in with the Tormus Valley, the most daring were initiated by Space Wolf Swiftclaw packs. Able to move at speed through the narrow, twisting passageways, the biker squads sowed havoc and confusion. The first an Eldar squad would know of their approach would be the roar of attack bike engines, followed by the thunder of bolter fire as they tore through their ranks, leaving nothing but carnage and death in their wake. The impatience of youth, though, usually comes with a lesson to learn, and in the heat of battle this rarely ends well for even those as powerful as the superhuman warriors of mankind. Bolstered by their victories, it did not take long for the headstrong Swiftclaw packs to attempt to outdo each other's achievements, boasting over their voxcoms of how far they had moved behind enemy lines and the tally of their kills. For one Swiftclaw pack, their bravado was to prove their undoing. Speeding through the southeast of the Tormus Delta, chasing a small squadron of Eldar warwalkers, the pack blindly drove into an ambush. Luring them into a large gorge, the warwalkers quickly accelerated into the canyons beyond, leaving the slower Swiftclaws in their wake. The Space Wolves were not alone, though, for standing like tall marble statues within the gorge were 5 Eldar Wraithguard, led by their Wraith Seer. As one, the eerie Wraithbone constructs opened fire. Like the much larger versions wielded by MYMEARA's Phantom Titans, their Wraith Cannon created rifts between the warp and real space in the path of the bikers, instantly tearing apart one of the Space Wolf pack and throwing their Wolfguard leader from his speeding vehicle as tendrils of dark energy lashed out at it. Dazed but still conscious, the pack's Wolfguard leader voxed an immediate request for reinforcements, knowing that his pack would not last long against such a foe. All Space Wolves in the vicinity, not already engaged in combat, would immediately come to their assistance, but in the meantime, the Swiftclaws would have to deal with the implacable advance of the Wraithguard and Wraithseer on their own. Those still mounted on their bikes roared towards the ethereal warriors, blasting bolt-around after bolt-around into them. Guided by the spirit stones of long-dead Eldar, the towering Wraithguard showed no fear as they weathered the firestorm, and fired once more upon the bikers, killing another Swiftclaw as the Space Wolves jinked and weaved to avoid them. Lying injured beneath his bike, and unable to move, the Wolfguard pack leader ordered his battle brothers to reform and concentrate their fire upon the leader of the Wraithguard, its Wraith Seer. Once an Eldar warlock who had died long ago, its spirit now once again directed the actions of its kin. Rather than trying to take out all the Wraithguard, if the Space Wolves could injure or kill it, they stood a greater chance of surviving the encounter with these ancient Eldar warriors. Snarling their rage, the Swiftclaws gunned their engines to full speed and circled around the wide gorge to attack the Wraith Seer. The Wraithguard raised their Wraith Cannon to fire again. It was then that the Wolfguard pack leader noticed that the Swiftclaws had made a tactical error. They had naturally closed formation as they had circled round. Given their proximity to each other, one hit on the target by their enemy would see them all torn apart. Their deaths were prevented by the arrival of one of the great company's few dreadnoughts. A steady stream of bolter casings fell to the ground as it fired into the gorge from the passage it had arrived from. The dreadnought's rounds tore into the Wraithguard's position, critically damaging one of the five, its spirit stones and armor shattering like ice. In response to this new threat, the Wraithseer turned with one swift motion, and with an unnatural strength threw its Wraithblade at the dreadnought. The faintly glowing blade dove deep into the armor, protecting the sarcophagus of the Space Wolf warrior within. The Wolfguard raged as it witnessed the death of the dreadnought's occupant. Powerless to help, he howled out his fury. The Wolfguard's battle call did not go unanswered. Watched intently on the pick screens of Port Rhea, the wave of over 200 MYMERA jetbikes, Vipers and Falcons that had earlier bypassed the battle against Company Vengeance flew on to the Tyranids Peninsula. The Armada did not turn immediately north to Port Rhea, as expected, but continued directly eastwards, towards the large mining complex of Astra 4. The facility was home to over 900 workers and their families, and as air raid sirens blared through the hab-block shantytown that stretched across its eastern side, the workers' militia were already charging into position, manning the bunker-sighted heavy weapons that were the core of Astra 4's defences. Joining them were the few elements of Battle Group Odin not fighting out on the Elation Plains, mainly support staff and the first of the injured guardsmen that had been brought back behind the battle lines. Regardless of injury or rank, all who were capable of fighting picked up a lasgun and prepared to defend themselves as the Eldar strike force launched itself upon the mining complex. Jet bikes and Vipers breaking formation and diving down upon the defenders in a hail of shuriken discs and star cannon fire. In return, shots from the heavy weapons bunkers and weapons batteries on the upper platforms of the complex pounded the skies. The assault from the air was swiftly followed by sniper fire from the hillsides surrounding the complex, where MYMERA's Guardian squads and Rangers had moved into position during the opening attack. The Eldar, it seemed, were intent on removing whatever threat those at Astra 4 posed to them. Had they believed the facility to be poorly defended, then the commanders of the Eldar strike were sorely mistaken. Ordered to move immediately into the path of this new Eldar force by Xenos Inquisitor Lord Dansk, the Elysian drop troop squads had already deployed in the hills above Aresta. Lying low, the Elysians, invisible in their camouflage uniforms, rose up and ambushed the unsuspecting Guardian squads as they passed by. The presence of the Elysians on the hillside slowed the Eldar attack, but it could do little to stop it. Pouring through the most vulnerable point of the facility, the hab-block shantytown, Aspect Warrior squads descended upon the militia. Howling banshees haunted the area where the bunkers had been set up, their psychosonic battle screams paralyzing all who opposed them, so that there was little resistance from the guardsmen and worker militia as they were cut down by the graceful warriors. But it was at the entrance to the mines that the worst atrocities were committed by the Eldar. Massive mining vehicles had been driven in front of the entrance to protect the workers who sought shelter within. The vehicles and the militia behind them lasted seconds as the vehicles were melted into little more than slag by the fusion guns of the MYMERA Fire Dragon squads, leaving those sheltering within undefended as the Eldar advanced. The nightmare unfolding at the Astra 4 facility would be short-lived though, as the Eldar flyers made for another pass at the heavy weapons teams in the bunkers. Imperial Navy Fury interceptors from the now orbiting fleet dived down through the clearing storm clouds just as the troop transports of Battle Group Vla appeared on the horizon. Perhaps realizing that the odds were soon to turn against them, the survivors of Astra 4 watched the Eldar flee. As the Imperium's waves of reinforcement began to spread out across the besieged eastern continent of Batalis 3, the Legio Griffanicus had already engaged once more with the Titans of the MYMERA Craftworld, still following their original orders given to them by Inquisitor Lord Dansk earlier that day. The Princeps of the Titan Maniples had tracked one of their foe to a region just north of where the battle between the Eldar and Company Vengeance was being fought on the Elation Plains. En route, the Phantom Titan had also been joined by 3 MYMERAN Revenant Titans. The second Phantom Titan, damaged earlier by the Demi-Maniple, had been observed by the Inquisitor Lord servitors entering the coastal region of the MYMERAN portal to the west, and was believed to have either journeyed back through it to the Craftworld or was now standing watch over the portal itself. Knowing that the presence of the remaining Eldar Titans could tip the balance of battle against Company vengeance, the Princeps of Invictus Nova had ordered his fellow Titan Princeps to engage with the Eldar Warstriders before they got any nearer. Facing an enemy half its number, but significantly superior in terms of armament and speed, the Imperial Titan Princeps knew that the odds were against them as they stepped into battle once more. The Legio Gryphanicus Titans split again into their two original groups. The Demi-Maniple Nova, now a Titan down after the destruction of the Warhound Magnus Canis, first attacked the Eldar Titans and then drew away eastwards into the heart of an ice storm. Their plan worked, and the lead Eldar steersman led his Titan host after them. In a series of skirmishes and assaults that ran over almost half the length of the continent, the two groups of Titans fought, moving through terrain much more in their favour than the rocky battlefield further west. The Demi-Maniple worked its way northeast via a 2-kilometre section of the highway that wound through and over the mountains. Meanwhile, the Exaro-Maniple headed west, and then north again, across another part of the highway. As the Eldar Titans followed Demi-Maniple Nova out onto the ice fields beyond, the Exaro-Maniple charged in behind them to cut off their exit point. Over the next hour, the gods of war of both races fought a furious battle, with little shelter save for the vision-obscuring blizzard. The Imperium's Princeps resorted to a pattern of feints and strikes to protect themselves from the Eldar's distortion cannons and pulsars. First, the Demi-Maniple Nova would close within range of the Eldar and fire upon them. Then, as soon as the Nova's shots were away, the Exaro-Maniple would attack, striding forwards to harry the Eldar Titans, attempting to prevent them from returning fire upon the Nova and its Warhound escort. The battle was not without casualties. The first was suffered by the Eldar. One of its Revenant Titans was destroyed as it attempted to break away and circle back around the flanks of the Exaro-Maniple. Spotting its ruse, the Maniple's Princeps ordered its 3 Reaver Titans and 2 Warhounds to fire upon its position. Their combined might overloaded the Revenant Titan's hollow fields and severed the power mechanisms within its leg casings. Unable to move, and with its lone crewman probably severely injured or dead already, the Eldar Titans self-detonated, denying certain elements of the Imperium the rare opportunity to study such advanced Xenos technology firsthand. The Legio Gryphanicus did not escape unscathed either. Its Warhound Titans suffered the worst attentions of their foes. 2 from the Exaro-Maniple received direct hits from twin pulse lasers of the Revenants, one being critically damaged and forced to retreat from the battlefield. The Phantom Titan was to wreak the most devastation with its distortion cannon. At the height of the battle, it came close to destroying the Exaro itself, with a shot from its arcane weapon glancing off the shields of the Battle Titan. Had the remaining Imperial Titans not come to its aid, whilst the Titan and its crew recovered from the power surge that had temporarily crippled it, then it may have been destroyed completely. Although most of the Imperium's Titans suffered serious battle damage in the engagement, they were to emerge victorious. With the threat of the MYMERA Craftworld Titans removed and Batalis free, the Legio Gryphanicus joined for the final hours of the war with mobile elements of Bran Redmore's company that had been set down by Thunderhawk gunship to assist Company vengeance. The small force of Space Wolves land raiders and other vehicles, plus the Legio's Gryphanicus Titans, then outflanked part of Alatok's armada, blunting its fury and preventing it from fully engaging with Company vengeance. With the hillsides around Aresta 4 reinforced by Elysian drop troops and forward sections of Battle Group Vlar, the Imperial Navy squadrons turned west towards Company vengeance. As the pilots approached the combat zone, they were met by an apocalyptic scene of devastation. Gone were the military-precise squadron formations, and instead remained a few tight pockets of resistance, focused upon nothing but the utter annihilation of their foe. Out of the hundreds of Imperial tanks and other heavy armour deployed there, less than a third was left. The joint MYMERA Alatok war host had also taken a severe battering. Proving once again his reputation as an expert tank commander, General Odin had organised vengeance into mobile blocks of tanks that bristled with guns, and for every Leman Russ or Chimera destroyed, 4 Eldar craft took serious damage or were blown out of the skies. It was the general's tactical expertise that had enabled Vengeance to hold out for so long, and as the advancing Imperial Navy battle wing began to move within range, the Eldar craft broke formation and turned back in the direction of the portal that had gained them access to the Emperor's world. At that same moment, in the Tormus Delta, Retribution's Vox network was flooded with reports that Alatok's land forces had also broken from battle, minutes before their war cries had echoed through the canyons. But now, the icy maze was near silent. Hundreds of kilometers above the Delta, the pic screens of the Imperial Navy fleet confirmed what all below already knew. The Eldar were retreating. The forces of the great Imperium of mankind had won the battle for Betalis Free. And there we have it, another kind of one-shot campaign. Probably going to have one or two more of these, and then some slightly bigger ones, multi-part ones coming up soon, as well as everything else that I've always mentioned before. Thank you to everybody supporting the channel. You can see your names here going past, and thank you everybody, it really means a lot, and thank you for your continued support. If you would like to help out the channel, please consider using the links below, either becoming a YouTube member, joining Patreon as a supporter, or and consider using the Brave browser. I genuinely use it. It's actually pretty good. I get about like 10 to 15 quid a month just for using the internet. So yeah, if you use that, I'll get a little reward. So that's a bonus. So that helps me and helps you. But anyway, enough shilling. But thank you, thank you for the help. Yeah, this is an interesting one, and I love stuff like this. The little details that add to the lore. For instance, the Sunblitz Brotherhood, one of the Corsair groups there. That's the Eldar Raiders, Corsairs in the Fabius Boyle novel series. And one of them, of course, turns into a Wraithbone abomination later on. But that's a whole other story. But it's just things like this, and it's nice to explore different battles and war fronts and just events that have occurred that don't involve, you know, Marnius Calgar shows up and shit like that. You know, it's just, you know, actual stuff the Imperium's doing on a regular basis, you know. And as well, this whole thing with this lost craft world and the recovery of a lost Phoenix Lord. Interesting stuff, you know, really good. But anyway, I'm going to go. Thank you all again very much for watching. Please do like the video, subscribe if you're not subscribed. Let me know in the comments what you think. I've retired the posho voice, for now. And I'm just going to use my normal voice for a while. Maybe change it up. But I don't know. I'll do that again because I find that voice really fun. You know, it's a pleasure to speak like that. I want to speak like that forever. Anyway, I'll see you later. Thanks very much for watching. Cheers again. Bye-bye.